You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news and events around the world. In the politically independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, getting straight into it. In the news this morning, well, on Saturday, former Vice President Biden was declared the president-elect as the states of Pennsylvania and Nevada swung in his direction. Big deal there, obviously, but of course, everybody listening to this heard this come out over the weekend. President Trump is pushing for a recount while holding a series of Trump rallies focused on the campaign's ongoing legal efforts in numerous states across the country. The campaign is also sending recount teams to Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. President-elect Biden, meanwhile, has promised to introduce a COVID-19 task force today, saying that the pandemic is the first of four major items his administration will focus on, the other three being the economy, racial justice, and climate change. Biden has said he will also reverse the Trump administration's immigration policies, including ending travel bans on majority Muslim countries and extending protections for DACA recipients. Neither China nor Russia, meanwhile, have formally recognized Biden as the winner of America's presidential contest as of yet. Jamarl, huge deal here. What's your take?
Well, I mean, it was clear that Biden was going to win at a certain point. In fact, I don't even know why they didn't call it. Well, no, I know why. Donald Trump screaming that there's election fraud and malpractice and everything else had probably held the media's hand on calling it. But at the point where he took the lead in like Georgia, and the only other places left were, let's say, heavily African-American districts, then it looked like it was a win. Same thing in Pennsylvania. Look, the truth of the matter is that Democrats had Pennsylvania for like 50 years. Republicans have been trying to get Pennsylvania for like 40 years. Michigan and Wisconsin, those were, again, Democratic strongholds. The fact that Trump won them one election season could be considered a fluke. So, I mean, meaning Trump had a hard way to go regardless. He had a hard way to go regardless. And Joe Biden won. I mean, my expectation was Joe Biden was going to take the presidency, Democrats was going to retain the House, and they were going to win the Senate. The Senate at this point seems to be in flux, even though it looks like Republicans are going to keep it. But we don't even know that yet. So far, my prediction is I'm 1 for 2, but we'll see. But the other, if I can be 2 for 2 with the Senate.
Yeah, we'll see about that. It seems pretty, if the Democrats take both of those seats, it'll still be 50-50, so they won't have a majority.
Yeah, but they'll have the vice president.
Yeah, they'll have a split. Pretty unlikely, though. I mean, just straight up going into it, looking at it from where it is now, those two races, at least one of them, I'll get into it in just a second here, actually.
Well, Republicans have won every runoff in Georgia.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but, no, I hear you on that one. Absolutely correct. Weird times we live in, so I wouldn't use that as a sole piece of evidence to say it's going to determine how it goes, but just based on the polling and stuff, based on, the votes in these elections last week, looks like they're going to win it. Anyway, on that story, in general political news in the U.S., runoff elections are due to begin next month in Georgia for two races that will decide whether Republicans continue to control the Senate. Of course, we're just talking about that. In the general election, Republican incumbent David Perdue will be running against Democratic contender Jon Ossoff, while in Georgia's special election, Democrat Raphael Warnock will be running against Republican Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed by Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp following the resignation of former Senator Johnny Isakson. Democrat Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has announced that she will be running for re-election in 2022. This comes days after she deferred the question. This was while the presidential election, the general election across the country, was ongoing. Meanwhile, in an interview with the New York Times, popular Democrat Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said she had almost considered dropping out of politics entirely, saying that, quote, the last 2 years have been pretty hostile. Externally, we've been winning. Externally, there's been a ton of support, but internally, it's been extremely hostile to anything that even smells progressive, end quote. Jamarl, I'm sure you've got a take on that. I'm curious to hear. What is it?
Yeah, that's going to be the monologue. I was fascinated by that. There's a naivety in that I actually like. Because, for her thing, she's looking at it like, I'm here to get stuff done. And these guys have been hostile to me trying to get that done. But then it becomes, but if that's true, then why are you telling us to vote for Joe Biden? Like, if that's true, then why are you saying that you're going to be able to push Joe Biden? Those things seem to be in conflict, right? It's like we've been winning on the outside. Yes, that's true. But internally, it's been really hostile, so much so I've been considering my political career. What? Then why are you telling us that you're going to be able to push Joe Biden to the left on this or that? Based on what you've just said, they've been extremely hostile. I mean, look, I keep saying the power of the left is not in the Democratic Party, it's on the outside. It's those tens of millions of people who are pushing for Medicare for all, who are pushing for expansion of Social Security. Those are the people. That's not internal. That's not internal. Now, maybe it becomes internal when you get more people in. So you get like a Bowman in. You've been expanding the numbers of the squad. So that's her point when she says we've been winning. But she's talking about just the internal resentments of dealing with people in the party. And that has been enough for her to be like, yeah, I don't even know if I want to stay here. That's shocking. That's shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. We can come back to that. As you said, that's going to be your monologue. So plenty of time to talk about that. In other news, in COVID news specifically, Pfizer this morning announced that its coronavirus vaccine is more than 90% effective at protecting people. That's compared with a placebo saline shot. This comes according to an interim analysis conducted by an independent committee that met on Sunday. This comes as on Sunday, the United States reported its 10 millionth coronavirus case, with the latest million added in just 10 days, as most of the country struggled to contain outbreaks in the third and most widespread wave of infection since the pandemic began. More than 103,000 new cases were announced on Sunday, the fifth highest total of the pandemic. The fifth day in a row, the country exceeded 100,000 cases in a single day. 7-day average of new cases now exceeds 111,000 per day, far more than any other country. The U.S. accounts for about 1/5 of all reported COVID cases in the world, a total that has passed 50.2 million. COVID-19 deaths are also on the rise, though not yet as steeply as case reports. As of Sunday afternoon, more than 237,000 people have died from the virus in the United States, and the 7-day average of deaths per day was over 900 for the first time since August. The CDC predicts that the toll could reach 256,000 by November 21st. In Italy, 39,809 new coronavirus cases were reported on Saturday. That is a new daily record. Its daily average has increased by 119% over the past 2 weeks. Deaths in Italy, meanwhile, have increased by 232% over the past 2 weeks, with 425 deaths reported on Saturday. France reported a record 60,486 new cases on Friday and 40,439 on Saturday. While the daily average there has risen by 57% over the past 2 weeks, deaths have increased by 170% in the same time frame. So deaths in Italy and in France increasing at a much faster rate than the cases have been increasing. Just interesting to note. On Sunday, 9 of the 10 countries with the highest average daily case totals per person were in Europe, including the Czech Republic, Switzerland, and France. That is according to a New York Times database. In the ongoing conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Azerbaijan said on Sunday that its forces had captured the key town of Shusha from Armenian separatists in Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia, however, insisted that fighting continued for the area. That town sits atop a mountain, and control of it would be critical in deciding the outcome of the conflict. The website Middle East Eye has said that the sides could be close to agreeing to a new ceasefire. They are citing Turkish sources. The deal would involve Armenia withdrawing from some areas, and it would also involve the deployment of peacekeeping troops from both Russia and Turkey. Again, according to the website Middle East Eye, not 100% confirmed there. Azerbaijan's president gave a lengthy interview to the BBC in which he said he would call off Azerbaijan's advance if Armenia withdrew its forces from the Armenian-occupied territory surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh, but has said that he sees no chance of negotiating a deal with Armenia's current president. In Ethiopia, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed replaced his army chief, the head of intelligence, and the foreign minister on Sunday as the military continued a 5-day-old offensive in the Tigray region with a new round of airstrikes. This comes after he said on Friday that ongoing military operations in the country's north that have stoked fears of civil war have, quote, clear, limited, and achievable objectives, end quote. on Twitter. B accused the TPLF of, quote, criminal hubris and intransigence, end quote, claiming they rejected the federal government's efforts at, quote, mediation, reconciliation, dialogue, end quote. And in Hong Kong, 19 opposition lawmakers have said they would resign en masse if the central Chinese government in Beijing disqualifies them. The convener of the camp, Wu Chi-wei, said that any move by Beijing to disqualify the legislators and prevent them from doing their duties would be, quote, ridiculous. This as media reports in Hong Kong, including from the South China Morning Post, said that the 4 lawmakers would be accused of filibustering meetings and violating their oaths of office. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we've got a few minutes here, Jamarl. Yeah, huge news with Biden winning on Saturday. That's kind of like the big thing that happened over the weekend, of course. And then, of course, Trump is continuing to push for recounts. And I think the big thing here internationally, just to sort of put an objective lens on this, again, neither Russia nor China have accepted the results of the election yet. Like back in 2000, this is an ongoing thing. It'll be going on for at least a month, by all appearances, possibly a bit longer than that. What I really would like to get is a sort of like a play-by-play analysis of where this could go as we move through this. And I mean, obviously, it's going to depend on the recounts. It's going to depend on whether the allegations of fraud are borne out by evidence as people start to look into it a bit more closely. I'm just left wondering if this is going to be one of those episodes in history that is kind of constantly uncertain, that, where certain sides take their side and it's sort of retrospectively polarized, if that makes sense. Each side claiming that they've been wronged. Whether Biden wins or Trump wins, it seems pretty likely that Biden's going to win this one, of course. But, on the off chance that Trump makes a case that the Supreme Court, different states push for recounts, those recounts come down on his side, and then somewhat miraculously, he manages to win the presidency back. If that happens, this is an understatement, I don't see the Democrats accepting that. But of course, the Republicans, I don't see the Republicans accepting this either. It's, 70 million voters for Trump. It's a big chunk of the country. Jamarl, where do you see that going culturally in the long run, politically, that side of it? What's your take?
I think this is going to be the new Russiagate for Republicans. They are going to be screaming voter fraud because of mail-in ballots. And they're, like you said, a lot of them, a chunk, are never going to accept the election results. And it's going to be kind of like Russiagate, where Democrats are running around screaming that the Russians carried Donald Trump over the finish line. And Republicans are going to be doing the same with this race. It just is. We've gotten into a really dangerous climate. I don't think people realize how the tradition in American democracy or representative government of the changeover, where this understanding of, okay, I ran in a race, I lost, I'm conceding, and I am showing my supporters, all of these people that voted for me, that I am conceding and that this person won the race and I'm shaking this man's hand and I'm going home, maybe ice cream or something. That's a huge, important part of our electoral process. And we're going to find out what happens when the president basically says, yeah, no, I'm not conceding. More and attacking the electoral system. Right now, it doesn't look like Republicans are backing him, which is why I don't think this is going anywhere. Meaning he may have the supporters, but people like Chris Christie or the Mitch McConnells of the world, even Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated Biden. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem like the people that he would need to back him are there to back him institutionally. So, who knows? It's 2020, right? And it's a Hail Mary. And Donald Trump should get his recounts, just like anybody else should get his recounts. I am one of those firm believers in recounts. I want to know who actually won the race. So I don't have any issue against it, but you can't do an infinite recount until you win. That's nonsense. And when your court challenges run out and everything else. Look, I want to know. To me, it is far more important that we have a transparent system where the public itself knows this person won and that person lost. When you don't have that, you get problems. More importantly, though, When you don't have that, you get the opposition that, for purely political reasons, goes out screaming fraud. And I think that's what you have. Republicans have been doing it for the last 20 years. And this is just the culmination. But let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with the monologue in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
You check top.
We couldn't put it better ourselves. Tune in to Political Misfits on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Miss the Press, our weekly takedown of Sunday's toothless news talk shows.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, definitely give us a like and share that content. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, phone call, 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, and I greatly appreciate you giving us that engagement. So, as Shane was talking about the AOC comment, this AOC interview was really interesting. I started off with a certain point of view of the interview. And as I read through it, darkening point of view. Just to go back and give context. The Democratic Civil War, what do people mean by that? If you're on the right, or if you're not necessarily engaged in politics that much, what this refers to is these factions within the Democratic Party that greatly dislike each other and that have been warring behind the scenes with one another. When AOC gets in office, and I've been saying this for 2 years because it's a logical outcome. AOC gets in office. She beats Crowley. He had been there for like 30 years. She says, we need to primary some folks. Now, why does she say that? That's the most logical thing in the world for her to say. If you, AOC, are pushing for Green New Deal and Medicare for all and the expansion of Social Security and the defunding of ICE, if that's who you are, and those people put you in office and got rid of a dinosaur to do so, then that's what you are. That's what you're pushing for. That's what your public expects you to push for. And that's what AOC did. Unrelentingly. She was the one who goes out and says, yeah, we need to increase taxes. And Fox News, how naive. She's saying we need to increase taxes. The American public would never be for that. Oh my God, the American public is for that. Hey, we need Medicare for all. The American public would never, oh my God, the American public is for that. And during the course of a pandemic, those numbers have only gone up. The COVID numbers have only increased. We are hitting record numbers of COVID. You don't think that people would want Medicare for all and the security of such during a pandemic? Those candidates that push for Medicare for all won. The candidates that didn't in the House lost. AOC made the point in this interview that she offered to help all of these different Democrats, and only 5 took her up on it. And the 5 that took her up on it, won or on their way to winning. The other ones that didn't, trending into losing. She even went so far as to say, I'm not the enemy. But I think AOC is being grotesquely naive here. When I initially started to do this, I thought, oh, this naivety is cute. But then the more I thought about it, it's like, not so much. AOC said we need to primary some folks. What does she think that means? You have all of these Democrats with a certain ideology of the world, these third-way Democrats. And she's coming in basically saying, I'm going to rip them out of their seats. And she's been doing that. What, Jamal Bowman has just come onto the squad. I can't think of the other woman's name, Cory Bush, just come onto the squad. Meaning they're increasing their numbers. She's doing what they said they were going to do. We're going to add members to the squad, and we're going to take this party in a particular direction. However, that breeds hostility among members of the Democratic Party that don't want that, which is the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party. Right now, the Democratic Party is pointing fingers at lefties saying it's your fault that we lost these seats, missing the point that marijuana decriminalization won in all of these states. These lefties who are winning, who are pushing for Medicare for all, won. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. But whether it's lefties' fault or not is secondary to the point that, of course, if you are saying I'm going to rip these people out of their seats, they're going to feel some kind of way about it, especially when they're part of an organized brain trust. Your group, the squad, in and of itself, the fact that they're naming you something different shows a distinction between who you are and the things that you push for and the rest of the party. AOC in this interview talks about the hostility. She's like, we've been winning our races. We've been doing what we were supposed to do. And yet there's hostility. Yeah, because you're winning means they're losing. I hope you understand you're not on the same team. What's also interesting here are the lies that are told. AOC knows full well that the Democratic Party likes to talk about their grassroots during the race, but after forgets about it. Like Obama, you guys can go home now, I got this. Well, this race will be no different. She knows this race will be no different. And yet, she vociferously pushed for Biden, even acted as if they were going to be able to push Biden on these climate change items, or for that matter, some of the other policy. People are policy. I've always said this, people are policy. The people who they are going to put into various positions in government dictate what the policy is going to be in those positions and what that particular administration is going for. Joe Biden frontrunners for Joe Biden's cabinet include Susan Rice, Doug Jones, Michelle Grisham, Eric Garcetti, Meg Whitman, or for that matter, Mitt Romney, he's in contention, Ernest Moniz, Tom Uda, Heidi Heitkamp. These people aren't lefties. These people aren't lefties. And here's the catch. If you, as Joe Biden, can run your race, can win your race by attacking Medicare for all, by attacking the Green New Deal, by pushing back against the left, by putting out Republicans on stage to basically attack elements of the left, to fill your cabinet with basically Republicans or Democrats in name only, and you as the left helped him get elected. All of these lefty organizations, all of you burn yourselves on the fire to get Joe Biden elected. Congratulations, you got Joe Biden elected. And now, like AOC says is normal, they're giving you your walking papers. Kick rocks. Thank you for helping me get in office. Kick rocks. What would have been the best position for the left to take? Think for the moment. If you are AOC, if you are one of these other people on the left that is pushing and agitating for all of these policies, what would have been the strongest position for you to take? Is it acquiescence? Because think of what just has taken place. You've gotten Biden elected. Despite the fact that Biden has attacked all of your policies, despite the fact that they've called you racist, bigoted, sexist, despite the fact that the DCCC and the DSCC has closed ranks and excluded all of these other organizations, blackballed all of these institutions that have tried to help lefties get elected, despite all of the pressure, so much so that you talked about not even wanting to be in politics, you still helped them get elected. And they, to their credit as normal, just like you said, has now gotten to the point of excluding you. Get away from us. Now, you might say you're bummed out because they're going to lose, but whether they're going to lose or not is secondary to what you and what the other progressive groups did. You helped them get in office. They thank you for it, and now they're telling you to kick rocks. We're going to govern the way we're going to govern. Just like Obama did the exact same thing. I don't know why you thought Biden was going to be any different. The catch here is that the position that lefties should have taken was to attack Biden, to push Biden, to go after Biden. You were so concerned that Donald Trump was this unique threat that you let Biden off the hook. You honestly believe that you were going to be able to push Biden after he gets in office. But you couldn't do it beforehand. My point is, in this interview, AOC is being far more honest and basically making the point, yeah, Democrats tend to do this. But if you know that, you still pushed for Biden. You still acted as if you were going to be able to push Biden to the left. You and those other progressive groups were being dishonest to your followers for that specific reason of trying to get Joe Biden elected, when you knew the truth was that this is how this was going to pan out. No, the position that the left should have taken was to attack Biden on issues of Medicare for all, threaten Biden with a loss, to go after him, to push him on all of these issues. Pick three and go after him on it. He either accepts or not. He might have refused to accept it because he could have looked at the race and everything else and see and believed he was going to blow it out. But your best position would have been to push him, because right now, like I said, like we kept saying, your leverage vanishes on election night. President-elect Joe Biden doesn't have to listen to you at all. He doesn't even have to remember your name at this point. If they're not going to take the Senate, Sanders is not going to take his position that he said he was going to take or he thought he was going to take. And Biden and Mitch McConnell have a lot in common, and they're going to be willing to get some pretty grotesque things done. Thanks, AOC, for helping him get elected. Shane, what do you think about it? I mean, ultimately, my point, even in the beginning of the race, was that the goal wasn't to get Trump elected. The goal was to push and attack Biden, to get Biden to appropriate policies that would have pulled him in line with a larger degree of the public. Meaning, instead of having 70% of the people backing him just to get rid of Trump, if you could pull him even an increment to your direction, you would have at the very least had all of these people saying, okay, I'm going to back Biden because he's Biden, and because Biden is going to push for this or push for that. This, you've ended up with, I don't want to say the worst of both worlds, but you have no leverage. Biden does whatever Biden wants to do at this point. And it looks like the people who Biden is bringing around him from the standpoint of cabinet are basically dinosaurs. He's just, as a Republican administration, a moderate Republican administration. Thanks, AOC.
Well, dinos. I mean, if you said dinosaurs, for some reason my mind got cut. Didn't know if you were done there. Democrats in name only. There's an argument you could make there. But yeah, also part of the ancien regime. But here's the thing, though, Jamarl. This is what it comes down to for me, and I fundamentally don't know how to break this divide, or if it even needs to be broken. But on the one hand, there are people who want to reform the DNC, and that seems to be their number one goal. And they're either reform or replace. They want to reform the left as such. And, it seems like you fall into that camp, and you're sort of categorically rejecting Biden because, he doesn't represent what most people on the left want or think. And on the other hand, there are people who are willing to work with what they have because the alternative is terrible. Those are like two. And here's the weird thing: is people will act out of those two different beliefs or those two different preferences or whatever, while sharing so many of the same convictions and having sharing the same set of ideas and hoped for policies, et cetera.
It is weird.
I don't know what breaks. I don't know where it goes. It doesn't make. I mean, it does make sense that AOC would be pushing for Biden to get elected if she falls into the second camp, and it might depend on what time of year it is, or whether or not you're in a steep electoral season, or the outcome of that election is going to decide years and years of where your party goes. I can empathize with anybody who supports Biden instrumentally. I don't, and you don't seem to either.
No, I don't.
I can empathize with that.
I can empathize. Don't misunderstand me. I guess my point is, you'd have been far better off. You'd have been far better off if you'd have been hitting and pushing Biden to appropriate policy that the public loved. Because ultimately, what you ended up with was Joe Biden running a tone-deaf campaign. And that tone-deaf campaign, meaning people believed the polls and people thought, okay, Biden is just going to win this in a cakewalk. Well, that's not what happened. This didn't seem like a cakewalk. This was a very close election. And part of the issue, the policies for the drug legalization or the people who were pushing Medicare for all, those policies won. And think about it. You're in the middle of a pandemic. You're having more and more people get ill over the course of the days. Do you think healthcare will be a priority or not? Of course it's going to be. I mean, it it goes without saying that it would be a priority on people's minds when you have 9 million people infected and 20, 30 million people don't have health insurance. But Biden didn't care. Then the secondary question becomes, what happens if the Supreme Court strikes down Obamacare? Then what? I mean, is he going to push through Obamacare 2.0? Biden care? I don't know. It's aggravating to me. I can empathize with people.
That's what he was talking about. Just to be clear, that's what he was saying he was going to do.
Push through Biden care?
We should go into a break. Exactly. Yeah, I think that was literally the phrase that he used back during the debate. In any event, we got to go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this break with Stephen Lendman. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. Joining us, Stephen Lendman, author and geopolitical analyst. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Oh, Jamal, Shane, good to be on with you. Oh, indeed. What? I'll let you ask the questions, and I'll try to answer them the best I can. But we certainly have something that will go down in the history books, and there'll be no asterisks besides what's been going on.
Yeah, it's fascinating, to put it mildly. There was a lot of consternation before this election because people weren't sure what was going to happen. Meaning, if a president refuses to concede, what happens to the electoral system? Is our system of government strong enough, to deal with these type of things? And you had a lot of people calling Trump a dictator, despite the fact that the dictator was running in a presidential race and that the dictator could very well lose because he didn't necessarily have a huge amount of institutional support. So how do you frame all of this? I mean, it's a fascinating time. It's 2020, right? And so the president is refusing to concede. So where does this go from here? I mean, if Trump just from here to the final point says, I am not going to concede this race, what happens from here on out? It seems like people are still just going to escort the president out if he doesn't concede.
Well, no one will need to escort him from the White House if it's determined that Biden-Harris won and he lost. There's practically nothing I agree with him on, but I absolutely 100% agree with him that election 2020 was stolen. It was well planned. This stuff doesn't just happen. It was well planned in advance. Powers that be, I had no way of knowing what the powers that be wanted. I thought for certain the powers that be wanted Hillary over Trump in 2016, but it turned out to be the opposite. And I just assumed that dark forces that run America, and that's the way the nation is run. You can call it the deep state, dark forces, whatever names you want to give it.
Stephen, is it possible that 2016 was just an upswell of democracy that put Trump in office?
No,
you don't buy that, really? You think that the elections are so planned that everybody that gets in office is a flat, fat, planned person from some aspect of power?
Well, I could give you lots of examples, but I'll go back to the beginning of the country. George Washington, the first U.S. president, he was not elected. He had no party affiliation. He ran twice unopposed, and each time he won unanimously. Unanimously. Now I ask you, is that democracy or is that something else? Well, it certainly is not democracy. There have been lots of stolen elections in U.S. history. I've written about a number of them. Washington did not steal the election. This was just the way it was set up for him. Well, you can make an excuse and say the country was new and just starting off, and he was a figure that was head and shoulders above anybody else in the country, the only one of the founders in Philadelphia who really stood out in the crowd. So he was chosen to be the first leader. I have no objection to that. Probably was a good thing to start off that way. But still, he was not elected. He was selected. But there have been lots of stolen elections. I've written about a number of them. I think 2020 will go down as one of the most brazen. I honestly believe Trump won and Biden-Harris lost. I don't think it'll turn out this way because I think the dark forces in the country decided that they wanted Trump to be a one-term president, and he would be replaced by whatever candidates the Dems put up. They anointed Biden and Harris to be their standard bearers, so they ran. Biden, just a terrible choice. Aside from his record over a near half century as U.S. Senator and Vice President, really a disgraceful record, just exclusively serving powerful interests and screwing ordinary people over that. And Harris, as a prosecutor, was a symbol of prosecutorial injustice while she served in that post. So it's a horrible ticket. But it could have been anybody, but they chose them. They anointed them. And I think whoever the Dems picked were chosen to defeat Trump. And again, I didn't know this when things started. I really thought because Trump has done so much for powerful interests in the country, just handing them billions of dollars and so on. I mean, these people have to love a guy like this. Wouldn't they want 4 more years of the same thing? So keep this guy around for 4 more years. And I thought the odds are favored that he'll probably get another term because Dems won't do as much as he's done. But I was wrong. They went the other way, supporting Dems over him, and all the postmortems will come out in the weeks and months to come. There'll be plenty written about this. But I think he honestly won, and I've written about fraud that took place in swing states. Ballots counted, well, the most egregious stuff that went on in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, where hundreds of thousands in Pennsylvania, roughly 1 million ballots, showed up overnight Wednesday before Thursday morning daybreak, 100% for Biden-Harris, 0% for Trump. It included ballots that came in late, ballots from people who were deceased, ballots from people who had left the state over 30 days ago and lived someplace else. Reminds me of what went on in Chicago many years ago. In Chicago, they used to take names from tombstones and put them on ballots and count them as for the candidate the machine wanted to be elected, either to aldermanic post or to mayor. This is the way Chicago worked. I think it's a little better in Chicago now, but it was pretty awful. But there's no question in my mind the election was stolen.
Stephen, thank you for being with us. So I'm still undecided on this one. It seems very plausible. Early on, I was given a lot more credence to it than I am at this point. The one thing that does stick out to me, and I kind of want to look into it more, and I'm not a statistician, so I'm not trusting my own take on this. And honestly, I want to look into it more. Have you heard anything about like the Benford's Law? Benford's Law specifically as it's applied to different key counties here. Have you been following that at all, Stephen?
No, I haven't, Shane. I'm honestly not familiar with that.
So Benford's Law I'm not going to go into the whole explanation here, but there's a complicated mathematical explanation for what it is. Basically, it is used in fraud detection and fraud prevention to sort of figure out if there are statistical irregularities. And basically, the very simple thing has to do with the way that digits work and how in a random series you're going to expect to see 1s more than 2s and 2s more than 3s and 3s more than 4s and 4s more than 5s, et cetera, just because we're a base 10 numerical system. Anyway, this might seem like it's coming out of nowhere, but people have been applying this to certain key counties, specifically in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Those are the two that really stood out. And if you look at the IDs put on the ballots and you analyze them using this law, there are some really, really stark irregularities that pop out. Granted, I'm not looking at this data, but it's interesting, and I'm throwing this out there. I'm not saying that this is true. I'm saying that from what I've seen, this is the most credible allegation that doesn't rely on inherently finicky first-person evidence. You can have a bunch of anecdata that doesn't add up to a whole data set. Anyway, I was just checking to see if you were familiar with that. The thing you were talking about with over a million ballots showing up in the middle of the night in Michigan, from what I've seen, that was actually explained as a sort of data glitch. Yeah. There was like a clerical error thing in their database, and it all came in all at once, and it was just they fixed that mistake, and it suddenly revised it.
100% Biden Harris.
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. With so much of this stuff, I'm not there. I'm not an expert on this. I don't know. But if there's a sort of plausible explanation, I'm not willing to go with it. But it kind of does deflate me if somebody comes out and they're like, well, no, this is what actually happened. What I would look for, and this is just in an abstract sense, I would look for somebody who does a debunking of that. If somebody comes out and says, okay, here's the explanation for what went wrong. It was a clerical error. And then somebody else with the knowledge comes in and says, no, it can't have been. And here's why. Then if there's no response to that, then there's a there. Anyway, I was just curious about this. In a general sense, I think that you can very easily make the argument that the media for years now has been trying to steal this election from Trump. With Russiagate, that was one thing. I mean, there's plenty to hit Trump on, but we can just talk about Russiagate for a second here. Since before he was elected president, since before the inauguration, to be clear, Trump has been hit for BS story after BS story having to do with Russiagate. Now, there's not an electoral commission that he can sue for that, so there's not going to be a clear resolution of it. And in some sense, those lines are already drawn in terms of who people are going to support. But Stephen, what do you think of this argument? And where would it go, frankly, that this election has long since been decided by the media and by the political establishment as such through the use of propaganda, through the use of lies? Stephen, what's your take?
Well, the vast majority of establishment media have been anti-Trump and pro-anybody else. They as I recall, they were pro-Bush Cheney over Al Gore in 2000, when Al Gore actually won the election, Electoral College and the popular vote. When the Florida votes were counted later on, even the New York Times, deep into an article, reported that Gore won Florida, where, of course, officially he lost, but in fact he won, and Bush Cheney were president and vice president, and Gore was left out, and he put up a weak-kneed battle about it. But that's history, and now we have it repeated again. The only thing I give Trump credit for is he's fighting for what he believes is right, and I'm with him on this. I am not a Trump supporter. I want to stress that. Anybody who follows my articles knows that I've been a very severe Trump critic. Just article after article criticizing his domestic and foreign policy. So there's no way in the world I support him. But I despise electoral fraud, and I really believe that's what's going on. I heard this, and I don't know if it's true or not. We'll find out in the coming days that the Trump people knew there would be fraud coming from the mail-in ballots. And I don't know how they did this, if the information is true. But what I heard is that they got an invisible code imprinted on mail ballots. How they could have done that, because it's all done at the state level. But this is what I heard and read, and we'll find out if it's true or not later on. And because of that, they can determine who's a legitimate voter and who is not a legitimate voter. I guess if ballots show up that don't have this mark on it,
or Trump is just a liar, and that Trump was going to call fraud if he lost. Meaning there was no situation where Trump was going to lose this race, where Trump was going to concede. He even said before, the only way for me to lose this race is if I'm cheated, which kind of gets across that the person was basically going to scream cheating regardless. I got to be honest, Stephen, I don't know what you're using to come up with the fraud claim. You can make an argument that some of races were stolen, fair enough, but I'm talking about this very specific one. That claim about the 100% for Biden, yeah, they're claiming it was a clerical error. And like I said, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan were typically Democrat states anyway. And Trump was able to get it the last time around in this kind of a fluke type thing. The fluke didn't happen this time around. I mean, I feel you. And I'm for Trump doing his recounts and everything else. But his own men, his own henchmen are basically poo-pooing this. But let's do this. Let's take a break. But we're going to come back. We have Stephen Lendman, geopolitical analyst and author. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, joined by Stephen Lendman. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and our guest, Stephen Lendman, author and geopolitical analyst. You can check out his articles on his website, stephenlendman.org. Stephen, thank you again for being with us. We can keep talking about this. We can also pivot slightly if you're down. Where do you think a Biden administration would go? Former vice president under Obama. In that sense, longtime politician. I think it's 47 years. That's the number that's repeatedly getting thrown around. How long he's been in politics. Where would he? In other words, we have a lot of evidence to go on in terms of what his policies are, where he would go, for better and for worse. What would that look like, assuming that comes to pass as it appears to be? Stephen.
Well, there's no question that he and Harris are establishment politicians. She's a U.S. senator after being a prosecutor in California. They were chosen to be establishment figures, to serve establishment interests, and that's exactly what they'll do. Over history, Dems have been a lot more belligerent abroad than Republicans. Goes back at least to Woodrow Wilson in World War I, Franklin Roosevelt, World War II, Lyndon Johnson, Southeast Asia. Bush Cheney was an exception, the post 9/11 wars, but then Obama added his own against Syria, against Libya. Trump, one good thing about Trump was he continued wars he inherited, but he did not launch a new one. At the same time, he launched vicious wars by other means, sanctions wars that have caused so much harm to so many millions of people in targeted countries, notably Iran, Syria. Syria, of course, there's a war going on, and no end to it. But Venezuela, North Korea, that he tried to come up with something on. Whatever his best efforts, best intentions were in North Korea, they were sabotaged by people like Pompeo. So it ended up falling apart. And North Korea realizing that it was duped, no sense going along with this anymore. So everything is as bad as it was before Trump came in office. The status quo will stay the same. Things will stay the same under Biden-Harris. I see no change at all. And for the worst, and as far as a progressive agenda, I see no possibility of that at all. There could be a few crumbs here and there, but nothing more than that. What did Obama do? He didn't do much. I don't think Biden will do much either.
From a foreign policy standpoint, I think that gets to be one of the most interesting parts. And I agree with you. I mean, why do you think Trump failed in what he was trying to do foreign policy wise? I mean, do you think he was just hamstrung? Do you think he really didn't have his heart into it? Or is it just there is a stick-to-itiveness regarding our military policy? For example, Trump was like, I want to get the troops out of Syria. Didn't seem like, I want to get the troops out of Afghanistan. And he got all sorts of resistance from that. Like, some of it just seemed like partisan resistance, but some of it was severe resistance that basically tried to prevent him and hamstring him from doing those items. Why do you think he failed on that? I mean, and that's assuming, you want to call it a failure at all. The Iran policy was atrocious. The Venezuela policy was atrocious. But like you said, he didn't start any new wars. And he seemed to have this level of brinksmanship that would go up until the point of no new wars. That policy is over with, though, just so we're clear.
On the one hand, I'll be kind and call him an unorthodox politician. He's been a businessman all his life. I mean, he's the first business. I don't know if he's the first, but let's just call him the first businessman who was pretty well known, who became president of the United States. So, I mean, his main mission his main objective in life up until he was elected was making money. And as president, he's gone way out of his way helping moneyed interests in the country make more money themselves. I mean, tax cuts for the rich and all the rest. So he's really served them very, very well. The reason why I just can't imagine they wouldn't have wanted to keep him around as long as possible. But he's gone against the grain on a number of things, especially rhetorically. He doesn't talk like a politician. He talks, I guess, the way he's always talked. He's his own guy. He speaks his mind as he sees fit. It's not the way politicians usually react. And I think he's really alienated a lot of people in Washington, including some Republicans, although I think he's held on to most Republican support, but not all of it. Lindsey Graham supports him, a notable figure in Washington. I think Ted Cruz, these big figures are powerful Republicans. I think they support him, but some others do not. Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey made some very hostile comments about Trump because of what he said about the election in Pennsylvania. Well, I think he's just gone against the grain. Biden-Harris, I think, looked at as being safe. So the country likes safe politicians, especially in high office. Others can do whatever they want if they don't have any positions of power. But I've said many times, and Trump is a bit of an exception, just a bit, not entirely, but nobody rises to high office in the U.S., either as president or in top congressional posts or in judicial appointments, unless this is considered safe. They either have to go along with the system or somebody else has chosen. And when mistakes are made, as they have been, notably John Kennedy, well, we know what happened to him. Maybe it was explained to Trump if he eased off in some respects to go along with keeping troops in Syria and Afghanistan. He wanted them out of there as well, but he didn't. He wanted to deal with North Korea, but didn't get one. Stuff like this. Maybe it was explained to him that you just don't want to do this. You want to back off and just hold off and go another way, because maybe a JFK fate will await you if you push things too far. And maybe even Trump, as outspoken as he is and going his own way so much of the time, realize that he would like to have a long life, whatever is left of it. He's in his mid-74, I believe. He'd like to have a good number of years left and not end up the way Jack Kennedy ended up. So he backed off. I think in the end, if it's pushed too hard, he'll back off on the challenge. And I think the challenge is warranted, but I don't think it'll go anywhere.
Well, I mean, and then there's the question of what his post-presidential life would be. I mean, he's widely reviled by the country right now. I'm not sure how his businesses would be affected by it. It seems like they've been hit kind of hard, actually, by him becoming the president, despite all of the fuss about the emoluments clause a couple of years back. Another side of this, you're talking about safety, and Biden being the safe candidate. I think the word I would use, and it's true, but the word I would use to be specific is predictable. You know what he's going to do, where Trump is notoriously unpredictable. And that's why, looking back at 2016, I can't help but think that was I get what you're saying in general about how elections are largely determined by money, how you can, money and reliability from the political establishment's perspective. And that is 100% true. But Trump came into this independently wealthy, able to sort of stand for himself. And while he has cozied up to the establishment, and he was longtime friends with the establishment through Jared Kushner, through his own business dealings, obviously, but specifically, longtime friends with the Netanyahu family. I can't help but think that 2016 was a fluke from the perspective of controlled elections or rigged elections, that he actually did win that one with a sort of populist plank. 2020 is arguably different. Arguably, he's, his base hasn't necessarily shrunk, but the opposition to him has only grown, of course. I think in 2016, Hillary Clinton, the DNC, the DCCC, they just didn't think that he had a chance. I think that they would have pushed a bit harder if they did, but according to the whole polling establishment, it was just an improbability and all, bordering on an impossibility that he would actually get into the office. And we're sort of living in the wreckage of the broken perspectives on the other side of that, not knowing, frankly, where America is, and this constant rallying chorus of, frankly, white supremacy is one part of it, but just an attempt to demonize a large part of the American population, calling them fascists and such. Hillary Clinton calling them deplorables. In some sense, that feels to me like the Democrats hammering the nail in the coffin of there ever being, of the DNC ever being a real representative for the working class in America. I can't help but think we're living on the other side of that now. With Biden, I don't see him making any changes. Stephen, what do you think about AOC's comments? I'm sure you saw this stuff coming out over the weekend in the interview with the New York Times, kind of pivoting slightly to a potential long-term reform or change in the Democratic makeup representing the left. Do you think there's any chance that the Democrats will reform? Do you see that ever happening, or is it just too much entrenched power, Stephen?
I can't say never, but the chance of any so-called reform under Biden-Harris, I would rate as zero. And I like your adjective, predictable. I would say that Biden-Harris are 100% predictable. Trump is mostly predictable, but he's not entirely predictable. And once in a while, he strays off the ranch and does things that the establishment does not like. So they want somebody who's 100% predictable, and they'll absolutely get that in Biden-Harris. But as far as progressive change, not a chance, zero chance, no chance at all. And don't forget, Republicans will probably control the Senate, so whatever Biden might want to do, and I don't think there'd be much, the Senate will prevent him.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell. I think he's going to, I think, to the chagrin of many progressives, or to the many lefties, that Biden and McConnell are going to get along fantastically well. There may be outside hostilities and everything else, but behind the scenes and the way that these guys interact, I think they're going to get along monstrously well. And I do think they're going to be able to pass some policies that McConnell is going to be on board for. And you can think about that as I think people can think about it. But, this is, I don't want to say the worst case scenario, but this is not necessarily the best of scenarios. Wall Street loves it because at this point, it's just an action. They're not going to be able to do what they want in either case. I'm curious, what do you think this means for 2024? Like, you can make an argument, and one of the arguments that AOC made was that Obama was injured based upon his transition team. Because, when you read WikiLeaks made the point that Obama's cabinet was basically chosen by Citigroup. And so, it becomes, all right, if Citigroup chooses your cabinet, how are you really going to ever do anything about Wall Street in the way that you said you were going to do when you were running your campaign? I mean, this is, again, after Wall Street basically tanked the world. So this is unfortunately going to be something similar. What do you think happens in 2024 if McConnell keeps the Senate? And 30 seconds, Stephen.
One thing for sure, Biden will only be a one-term president, and I highly doubt he will complete his term because he's cognitively and physically impaired, and I suspect that somewhere along the term, Harris will replace him. If she does, she'll run in 2024, and she may win. She may run for president and be elected to be president in 2024, but who can predict that?
Yeah, it is a long way off. I mean, Biden's just gotten elected, so. This is Stephen Lendman, the voice you guys are hearing, Stephen Lendman, geopolitical analyst and author. Stephen, thank you again for joining us. I always appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you. Jamarl, glad to be on with you.
Absolutely. So let's do this. Let's take a break, maybe 30 seconds or so early. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, on Saturday, former Vice President Joe Biden was declared the president-elect as the states of Pennsylvania and Nevada, swung in his direction. President Trump is pushing for a recount while holding a series of Trump rallies focused on the campaign's ongoing legal efforts in numerous states across the country. The campaign is also sending recount teams to Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. President-elect Biden, meanwhile, has promised to introduce a COVID-19 task force today, saying the pandemic is the first of four major items his administration will focus on, the other three being the economy, racial justice, and climate change. Biden has said that he will also reverse the Trump administration's immigration policies, including ending travel bans on major Muslim countries and extending protections for DACA recipients. Neither China nor Russia have formally recognized Biden as the winner of America's presidential contest as of yet. It's funny, Israel did it almost immediately. Ann Coulter was like, but he moved the embassy. I don't think they realize that doesn't really matter. Ultimately, the foreign leaders, especially countries like in Germany or let's say UK, these guys love the fact that Joe Biden's back. And so they were chomping at the bit to welcome him back. And from their standpoint, they're looking at, they want America to get back to the business of globalism. And that's where Biden comes in. What do you think, Shane? I mean, I don't necessarily think it's significant that Russia and China hasn't necessarily given the nod yet. Maybe they're just waiting to be on the safe side. There's no loss and just making sure. But what do you think about other countries and the United States getting back to this kind of status quo stuff? And it seemed to be the country rejected that same status quo perspective. For example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Biden tries to reinvigorate the Trans-Pacific Partnership and tries to pass it.
Back into the neoliberal game. Yeah, I could see that happening too. I mean, with Netanyahu, it's a dagger in the back to Trump, and I'm sure he's taking it that way. Trump, I mean. More broadly, I mean, I think that Russia and China not recognizing Biden are significant in that Israel, the other countries, Germany, Merkel came out and congratulated Biden on this. Very, very quickly, you saw a rash after Biden was announced president. You saw a raft of congratulations coming from countries across the Middle East. Saw those popping up very quickly within minutes. Those are within our sphere of influence. Those are sort of hanging in the balance between the great powers of the world. And the fact that Russia, the fact that China, neither of those countries have fallen in with Biden on this yet, simply means that I'll put it like this. It's almost like the frame. Those are sort of objective figures outside of our sphere. And I take their opinion, their perspective, their response as objective and as providing a frame for what's actually going on in our country.
They're not objective.
No, but they're outside. Well, but they are in the sense in which it's useful to use the term. They are outside of our subjective sphere of influence.
No, what I mean is all of us are in the world together. And everybody on this planet, especially geopolitical actors, have something out of it. Yeah. Like, for example.
Yeah, but you recognize, Jamarl, here's the thing. You recognize, and we could go back on this, and this is a philosophical dispute.
No, it's not. This is pretty straightforward.
Doesn't fit into headlines.
Does China and Russia have something to either gain or lose, depending upon who wins the presidency of the United States? And if they do, then they're not objective. They have a subjective want, just like every other country.
Yeah, but I don't know that they would do any better under Trump is the thing. I genuinely don't.
Well,
so if what you're saying is that they're pushing for him.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. When Biden and the Democratic Party, when they're taking office after 3 years of a rabid conspiracy theory of Russiagate. That rabid conspiracy theory informs the way they think about the world, the way they think about foreign policy, all that stuff. I would imagine if you are Russia, meaning the target of that, then you may have qualms or concerns with somebody like Biden getting in, not necessarily knowing what these guys are going to do when they get in office. Meaning, it's unpredictable because you don't necessarily know how much he actually believes the stuff that they've been pumping out to their public. That concerns me, honestly. Like, from a foreign policy standpoint, Trump was better on foreign policy. And I know some people might think that's mind-blowing, but like Lendman said, he kept us out of wars. Whereas I don't necessarily have that belief for Biden. But let's get to headlines. We could talk about it in one of the other segments.
Yeah, I disagree, but we should come back to it.
Okay. In general political news in the United States, runoff elections are due to begin next month in Georgia for 2 races that will decide whether Republicans continue to control the Senate. In the general election, Republican incumbent David Perdue will be running against Democratic contender Jon Ossoff, while in Georgia's special election, Democrat Raphael Warnock will be running against Republican Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed by Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp following the resignation of former Senator Johnny Iskan. Democrat Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has announced that she'll be running for re-election in 2022. This comes just days after deferring the question while the election was ongoing. Meanwhile, in an interview with the New York Times, popular Democrat Representative AOC Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said she almost considered dropping out of politics, saying, quote, "The last 2 years has been pretty hostile. Externally, we've been winning. Externally, it's been a ton of support. But internally, it's been extremely hostile to anything that even smells progressive," unquote. Pfizer this morning announced that its coronavirus vaccine is more than 90% effective at protecting people compared to the placebo saline shot. This comes according to an interim analysis conducted at an independent committee that met on Sunday. The United States reported its 10 millionth coronavirus case on Sunday, with the latest million added in just 10 days. Wow. As most of the country struggled to contain outbreaks in the third and most widespread wave of infection since the pandemic began. More than 103,600 new cases were announced on Sunday, the 5th highest total of the pandemic according to the New York Times database, and the 5th day in a row the country exceeded 100,000 cases in a single day. The 7-day average of the new cases now exceeds 111,000 per day, far more than any other country. The United States accounts for about 1/5 of all reported coronavirus cases in the world, a total that has passed 50.2 million. COVID-19 deaths are also on the rise, though not yet as steeply as the case reports. As of Sunday afternoon, more than 237,000 people have died from the virus in the United States, and the 7-day average of deaths was over 900 for the first time since August. The CDC predicts the toll could reach 256,000 by November 21st. In Italy, 39,809 new coronavirus cases were reported on Saturday, a new daily record. Its daily average has increased 119% over the past 2 weeks. Deaths in Italy, meanwhile, have increased 232% over the past 2 weeks, with 425 deaths reported on Saturday. France reported a record of 60,486 new cases on Friday and 40,439 on Saturday. While the daily average there has risen by 57% over the past 2 weeks, deaths have increased by 170% in the same time frame. On Sunday, 9 of 10 countries with the highest average daily cases were in Europe, including the Czech Republic, 3rd highest, Switzerland, 4th highest, France, 8th highest, according to the Times database. Wow. Azerbaijan said on Sunday that its forces had captured the key town of Shusha from Armenian separatists in Nagorno-Karabakh, but Armenia insisted that the fighting continued for the area. The town sits atop a mountain, and control will be critical in deciding the outcome of the conflict. The website Middle East Eye has said that the sides could be close to agreeing on a new ceasefire, citing Turkish sources. The deal would involve Armenia withdrawing from some areas of the deployment of peacekeeping troops from both Russia and Turkey. Azerbaijan's president gave a lengthy interview to the BBC in which he said he would call off Azerbaijan advance if Armenia withdrew its forces from the Armenian-occupied territories surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh, but it said that he sees no chance of negotiating a deal with Armenia's current president. Wow. Shane, that's fascinating. Now, I saw this story over the weekend where Azerbaijan basically said we were able to take the second largest territory in Nagorno-Karabakh, with Armenia basically saying that's not true. The catch here becomes, how can you get a ceasefire when both sides are at such odds? Meaning one side says, you're occupying our territory and we're not willing to pull back until this issue is resolved. And the other side basically said, no, this is a war of independence. Meaning there's no way to mind this. These two sides are basically punching their way until they get to the point of saying, okay, now we can agree on something based on the new, let's say, environment, the new setup. The wild card in this is Turkey. And the catch becomes, has Azerbaijan really gotten the territory that they claim they've gotten? Would Armenia be okay with pulling back? Meaning with, let's say, a new setup in regards to the way the environment is going to look. Like, all of these things are in flux. And look, at this point, this is a bloody conflict where these guys are still going at one another. I am surprised that this has broken through a little bit more in the U.S. news, considering the implications. And there are also questions about what does the new president do in this scenario. And so a lot of this stuff is up in the air, whether or not these guys can agree on some kind of peace terms. And I really wish we would have had opportunity to ask Stephen Lendman about this. We were kind of carried away in the U.S. election. What do you think about this? Do you have any comments on this before we go to the next headline?
I mean, real quick, it does seem like Azerbaijan's taking Shusha. They're taking the region surrounding Shusha. Just looking into it within the past couple of hours, Turkish outlet TRT World is saying that Azerbaijan has taken 23 more villages within the past day in the region. So it seems like that offensive is gaining some momentum. I don't like the cost in human lives, and I wish they would have worked this out in advance diplomatically, but that doesn't seem to be how the world works.
Yeah.
Just to be frank.
I don't know if there was a diplomatic solution to it, considering what they wanted. It's like if I say, Shane, I want your car. And you're like, dude, I'm not giving you my car. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe there's a diplomatic solution to this. There's no diplomatic solution to that. You know what I mean? Like, there's some things that people ask for that are so off the table that the only way to solve it is some kind of conflict. And unfortunately, that seemed the way this was going, especially with Turkey backing them. Because at that point, you have an issue of force.
Real quick, on this, it's you say there's not going to be a diplomatic solution. I don't see any other solution than a diplomatic solution.
No.
Especially
I
these aren't powers of the highest order. It's not going to be some final occupation or something like that persists into perpetuity. It's going to be mediated, not just by these two countries, by Turkey, by Russia. It's gonna be a diplomatic solution ultimately. But what's your take, Jamarl?
No, that's not what I said. I said there's some things where, depending upon what the person is asking for, there's no way to mind that. Like, it's almost like the fight is necessary to even figure out where the two sides stand, just because of what the people are asking for. No, you're right. There has to be a diplomatic solution. Like, I don't believe that they're going to, meaning I think this conflict is contained. I think that Turkey and Azerbaijan knows that if they try to cross into Armenia, that Russia is going to get involved in somewhat of a heavier way. So I think in their heads, anyway, it's to some degree contained. And the question becomes how far before they find some diplomatic solution. And by the way, the diplomatic solution is likely going to depend upon their gains. Meaning, if Azerbaijan is saying, we're not going to stop until we get something changes. Well, if they're capturing territory, then the territory gains that they make may in and of itself enough be for some kind of settlement. But we'll see. This is one of those things where it's an issue of time. But let's do this. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, I've been fascinated by the story. And I've been fascinated by it just because of this question of independence. And what does it mean for a place to be independent and for the world to recognize that independence. And that hits not just on us, but on issues of Palestine, on issues of Hong Kong, etc. It seems like we revisit this question constantly. And I don't know if the world has come to a clear decision on it. Let's do this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and we are joined by Adam Eidinger, activist and organizer in the fight to legalize cannabis. Thanks to his tireless efforts, Initiative 71 became a proposed ballot measure in the 2014 D.C. elections that ultimately resulted in the legalization of cannabis in the nation's capital. And then more recently, last Tuesday, to be specific, D.C. voters said yes to Initiative 81. Adam, thank you again for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Real good. I think I've recovered from last week.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Let's just go right into it. Initiative 81 passed. I believe you were a key part of this. I believe you were the treasurer for this organization. Last time you joined us, you were telling us about the real person who started that. Can you just briefly tell us what was Initiative 81? What is its scope, and what is it going to look like now that it's been passed?
Sure. Initiative 81, the Entheogenic Plant and Fungus Act, was proposed by Melissa Labasani, a D.C. government employee who suffered tremendously from postpartum depression and chose to use psilocybin mushrooms to treat that depression, and then later ayahuasca. And her recovery was remarkable, and she realized that people shouldn't be living in fear for using this substance. She's a white woman, and she felt she was a privileged person, but not everybody's privileged like that. And there are still about 2,000 narcotic arrests a year in D.C., and some portion of those, we don't know exactly how many, are psilocybin mushrooms and other plant medicines. So, Melissa, led this campaign for about a year now, and we really overwhelmingly passed this thing. The voters supported it by 76%. And to put that in perspective, when we legalized cannabis in 2014, that was only 70%, which is still a landslide, right? But we, not in our wildest dreams, when we started this, did we think that we would get 76%. I mean, we had polling that showed strong support in the 60s, and we were confident of victory going into Election Day because there was no opposition campaign. But the people of Washington, D.C. have just made plant-based psychedelics, ayahuasca, ibogaine, mescaline, and that comes from cactus, as well as fungus, namely psilocybin fungus, the lowest police priority and the lowest prosecution priority. If you manage to get yourself arrested for this, you still have a chance of not being prosecuted. But if you're dealing this, if you're, showing up at a school dealing mushrooms, the police are still going to arrest you. There still is a criminal charge that you can be charged with. This simply gives the authorities the instruction to make personal use, to make, if they stumble upon mushrooms, say during a traffic stop, it might not lead to a drug charge then and there. It might not lead to your arrest then and there. And that's going to be a change. But we think it's a stepping stone really to further criminal justice reform in the context of the drug war. And, Congress is actually, U.S. Congress is blocking the nation's capital from decriminalizing penalties for drug crimes currently. But we hope that maybe in this next Congress that will be changed.
I would like to hope, I certainly hope so. I'd like to think so too. I mean, this also comes as in Oregon, Measure 109, voters passed Measure 109 by a much smaller margin than the one that you were just mentioning in D.C. 76% is crazy. That is more than a landslide. That is almost a mandate. Whereas in Oregon, I think it was 55% voters voted yes on Measure 109, which, by the way, basically legalizes psilocybin. So it's not all entheogens like you're talking about, and it's a little bit more than decriminalization. They're setting up like a whole service provision pathway where you don't have to be a healthcare professional, it looks like, but there's this process by which people can administer psilocybin mushrooms, which might straight up be shorthand for dealing in the long run. I'm not sure what exactly that's going to look like. But Adam, what's the deal there?
Okay, so I actually think 109 will be pretty strict about who can distribute mushrooms to patients. It's going to require a doctor's recommendation. You would be going to a clinic. You wouldn't be taking them home. You'd be doing the mushrooms under supervision of a psychologist and a therapist. A psychiatrist possibly could do it as well. So there has to be licensed physicians, licensed psychologists and psychiatrists involved in the administration of this new program. And so I think it's going to be a model program, a therapeutic approach. And we really should all look at what happens in Oregon and let them, set the program up and judge it based on how well it does. But there was also another initiative in Oregon, and that was 110, and that passed by a wider margin. I believe 59% supported that, and that is decriminalizing all drugs for personal use. And this is actually removing the penalties for people that are caught with very small amounts of any drug, cocaine, heroin, LSD. It basically is the beginning of the end of the broader drug war when you see this type of legislation pass in an entire state. And honestly, I'd like to see similar legislation passed here in D.C. This for me personally, it's always been about ending the drug war. That we can deal with drug addiction in a more humane way than locking people up. I think you get better results when you treat people with respect, where they can speak openly about their drug addiction. We currently do that for alcohol, tobacco, and other substances, prescription drugs, where people can openly talk about their addiction without the fear that, well, I just admitted to a crime. And so why don't we just do that with all drugs and say, look, any drug, even methamphetamine, which is an awful substance, I still think locking someone up for methamphetamine rather than aggressively offering them help, offering them counseling, offering them a way to become unaddicted. And there are lots of ways. We know how to treat drug addiction in this country. We spent billions of dollars on researching drug addiction. But there's a disconnect between, you're a drug addict, therefore we're going to lock you up with hardened criminals, with violent criminals, the people that do belong behind bars that have to be separated from society because they have become so violent or so dangerous to the rest of us. Why would we put someone who's struggling with drug addiction in the same prison, the same jail as those people who are murderers, rapists, and violent criminals or hardened criminals who are living a criminal lifestyle? We only spread the criminality to these folks who are using substances. So I hope that I think the public is finally getting this, that the drug war was a total failure. It abused our own citizens. And even I was encouraged by Joe Biden. I've been a critic of Joe Biden for many years because of the 94 crime bill. I worked in Congress at that time, and I worked on that bill. And it was horrific, and he was the main backer. But all these years later, even Joe Biden is saying that was a mistake. He's saying, I regret that bill. I regret laws that he even also talks about bills in the 80s on crack cocaine that he supported. He regrets it. So I think this has become a mainstream progressive issue at this point. I'm expecting a lot of drug policy reform in this next administration at the federal level. I think we'll finally decriminalize marijuana at the federal level, and that would be great to get it out of Schedule 1 because it has still no legitimate use under the eyes of the federal government, and that's, the majority of states have decriminalized or legalized at this point. So, we're long overdue for some federal reforms, and this was a missed opportunity for Donald Trump, really. He could have really used this issue to get frustrated people to vote for him. There was a lot of one-issue people out there when it comes to drug policy. And instead, he talked a big game, but he actually didn't implement anything. He didn't change anything about marijuana policy at the federal level. And he controlled the Congress, and he could have done something, but instead he let, I think, really Christian conservatives that are still supporting locking people up for using drugs on some sort of moralistic basis, which is unfounded. I think those folks are the reason why he didn't actually make any real progress as president. I don't expect him to before he leaves office.
Yeah, I think there's a massive disconnect in this country on drug policy. I mean, the putting people in cages for pot is astonishing. It's like you've been smoking. Like imagine an alcoholic cop, dragging somebody. You're breaking the law for smoking this plant, and so I'm going to take you to jail. It's insane. But that's been our policy. And so, yeah, the fact that many of these states have gotten to the point of saying, okay, we're going to decriminalize, good. And for your assistance on this, good job, Adam. I mean, honestly, great work for the D.C. legislation, especially for psilocybin and some of the other plants, mescaline and whatnot. And I agree with you. I don't think there should be drug laws in the way we're putting people in cages. Those things can be dealt with from a medical standpoint. But beyond the medical standpoint, environment. Like, if you take somebody out of a horrific environment where they're living in dirt poverty, and you put them in a cage, making their job prospects worse, making it that much more difficult to get a job later on, or even housing later on, for a drug. And then you send them back to the exact same community that they were in, and yet you're shocked that they ended up in the same dire straits. Meaning there's a hypothesis that drug use, meaning people who are using like cocaine, especially people who are addicted, has a lot to do with the environment that those people are in, not necessarily some kind of defect in the individual. And if you change the environment, you can change the behavior of the person using those drugs. I guess my point is locking a person in a cage doesn't in any way change that person's environment for the better. It actually makes a person's scenario worse. And depending upon why that person is using those drugs, you've literally have created a worst case scenario that incentivizes the use of that drug more, as opposed to dealing with that person's material problems. Is there a there to that? Like that this is a lot to do with environment and less to do with some kind of personal failing on the individual's part?
We incarcerate people because they're harming other people. That is the legitimate reason to put someone in a cage, is when they're harming other people and they go beyond their own rights, they're violating someone else's rights. But when you are using a substance, any drug, if there is harm associated with it, and that's a big if, because not all illegal drugs are harmful, it turns out, and many of them are beneficial. But if it's harmful to that person, compounding the harm with incarceration is not helping them, and you're not protecting anyone else. In fact, when you break up a family, let's say a father, with a family of 4, is caught with a small amount of marijuana in Texas, where it's still illegal, or in Arkansas, or someplace where that hasn't made these reforms yet. And they could have their whole life turned upside down. They could lose their job. Because they didn't show up for work because they were sitting in jail for a week trying to make bail over a small amount of marijuana. It can lead to, if you're black or brown in this country, this encounter with the police is often deadly. And we've seen that way too much. And, if we want to reduce the number of police encounters with the public, we will save lives. We know that. The more the police encounter people, the more people do die. And it's sometimes accident, sometimes on purpose by the hands of the police. And I just, I think it's good for the police. I think they get, when you decriminalize, when you legalize and end the drug war once and for all, you're going to have more trust in law enforcement, because you can, if you say there's like a crime that takes place and there's heroin involved.
Adam, I'm sorry, we have to interrupt it to end it, but I want to thank you for coming on. This is Adam Eidinger, activist and organizer in the fight to legalize cannabis. Thanks to his tireless effort, Initiative 71 became a proposed ballot measure in 2014 D.C. elections, which ultimately resulted in a legalization of cannabis in the nation's capital. Adam, thank you again for joining us. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Tom Luongo, geopolitical analyst and publisher of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter. Tom, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I don't have him just yet.
Oh, we don't have Tom on. Pardon me. Well, quick breaking news update here, actually. I believe that this is just coming in. Presidency of the Nagorno-Karabakh region has said that Azerbaijani forces are moving in closer to Stepanakert. So it seems like the declaration by Azerbaijan that they've taken Shusha, some ongoing.
Good morning.
But it seems like it's an ongoing thing.
So basically,
in any event,
the forces are on the move. Here's the thing. Azerbaijan and Turkey, and the force that these two were able to bring to bear. Everybody that we've brought on have been very clear that they've been able to use a lot of the money that they've been spending and dump it into military. And to me, if I am in, let's say, a conflict with someone, and that person's capabilities are expanding, then I'm getting very nervous in that conflict. Does that make sense? Like, there needs to be some level of balance. And the moment that the balance breaks, then the reason and incentive of the opposition is to attack. Turkey has basically allowed that, meaning by itself, Azerbaijan was going to be somewhat of a force. But adding in Turkey's element to that gives all the incentive in the world for them to press. And it seems like that precedent is making gains. And so, I think the world needs to pay attention to this, because depending upon how far this goes, this could have far larger implications than just this kind of border or this, specific conflict. But we'll see. Tom is here.
It very well could. Yeah. No, Tom is definitely here. I think the larger parties here want to keep that from happening. But we'll see what goes down. I could be wrong. In any event, you're right. Tom Luongo, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I was wondering where you guys were, and I ran downstairs to check my phone to make sure we hadn't misscheduled this or whatever. So, I'm here. How are you guys this morning?
All right. But better for having you. I'll just start right here simply. For those listening, Tom Luongo, geopolitical analyst, publisher of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter. And by the way, you can and should follow him on Twitter at TFL1728, 1728. And you can check out his articles at tomluongo.me. Tom, I'll start like this. What do you think about the election?
What I can say about the election here on radio is not publishable. I feel I'm completely livid at what's going on here. Yeah, it's not radio friendly. What I would really like to say, but it's very obvious that this was planned from the beginning as a fraud, color revolution, whatever you want to call it. I've been talking about this for 6 months, been laying the groundwork intellectually that you can see the pattern playing itself out all through the COVID-19 lockdowns and everything else. So they were going to use that as a means by which to delegitimize Trump before the election actually got here. And then once the vote total started coming in, then things go into motion. And I don't believe a moment of what's happening here. And about 2 a.m. on Tuesday night, as I was watching the election returns, and everything kind of stopped. And I looked at the scenario and I went, I've seen this story before. I've watched many an election happen and have watched election steals happen in real time. And it's very obvious what's happening. It doesn't matter if we're talking about Bernie Sanders in 2016 or we're talking about Ron Paul in 2012. This is what they do. And for the larger picture, and this is what I'm now actually in the process of writing a post about right now, is that this is about a bigger thing than just stealing this election or trying to get Biden elected or anything like that. This is about all of the things that I've been talking about in terms of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset and the movement of political power in the West from the United States to Europe and or possibly even the UN, but I'm not even sure I even buy that one. This is just truly a means of destroying the validity of the American political system, even if, no matter what happens, no matter if it turns out that Biden actually did win the election, which I don't believe, but even if he did, if we go through the entire court process and the recounts and the audits and everything else, and it turns out, yep, he actually won. Well, fine. The process will have been destroyed. And I think that that's the really big issue for everybody here in the United States right now, and that's why this has to play out through the courts. We have to uncover everything that's been done in order to stop it. So, but truthfully, I'm livid, like in a way that I haven't been in a long, long time.
Well, I mean, I got to be honest, Tom. This seems like this is going to end up being Russiagate for the right. I agree with you that they should go through the courts, do your recounts, all that stuff. I think all that stuff should be done because at the end of the day, I want a transparent election. And I want both sides to know who won. Like, I don't like this nonsense where people have to assume, whether that's proprietary software, whether that's, interstate cross-check where you're knocking people off of the voter rolls, whether you're having these long lines. All of these things are horrendous in regards to an electoral system. And all of these things are done either to weed people out, to make it difficult for people to stand in those lines because they have to work. Like, all of these things are done to game the system. And for decades now, we've had two political parties that could have come together and say, let's fix the electoral system. Let's make sure it's transparent.
Agreed.
Why don't they do that? And this is not one party. This is both.
Oh, no. Jamarl, you're asking the exact proper question, which is why didn't they do it? And you know why the answer is. Because they want the ability to fix elections that the people don't give them the answer that they want to hear. Okay? That's what this is about. That's what I was trying to say in my rambling opening comments. We could fix election technology in this country in like 20 minutes. It's not hard. A little open source software, everybody votes online with a QR code, done. I mean, it's not hard. We could do this. It's easy to do. They refuse to do it because they don't want to do it. Because he who counts the votes are far more important than he who actually casts the votes. And we all know that. So the system is designed to be as maximally corrupt. It doesn't matter if we're talking. I've always operated under the assumption as a libertarian that he who cheats best wins elections. Okay. But when the choice is between two neoliberal globalists, it doesn't matter who cheats best. It's all that matters is, what they're trying to sell to the American people and whether or not they congratulate each other for a job well done behind the scenes.
Real
and
quick,
then they
Tom,
fight.
Answer me something.
Seemingly.
Adam,
so this one is different, though. This is fundamentally a different election.
Well, wait,
and I've come to that conclusion a long time ago.
Answer me something. Why didn't Trump legalize pot? I don't believe for a moment that Trump has an issue with pot. We had a guest, Adam, that was here in the last break, and he kind of made the point that Trump dropped the ball on this very specific point because he could have made, like, inroads. Sure. What was his hedge against that, especially from a libertarian standpoint?
Know. I don't know. And I'll be honest with you, the libertarian vote isn't very important. And I hate to break this to my libertarian colleagues, and I excoriated them in a blog post this time last week, saying, look, guys, it's time for standing on the sidelines like a bunch of band nerds, okay? Having to sit through the high school football game for your college resume point is over, okay? This is something fundamentally different. This is something that both the left and the right, everybody on both sides of the political fence who want control over their society, who want control over the apparatus of their government, have to agree that this is fundamentally wrong. And there was one guy, like him or not, trying to bring the country. Look, I don't know how to put Trump into categories here, because it's very obvious he was bringing people together. Those rallies were not fake. Okay, there was something very real and organic and heartfelt about that, and he was doing the work that other anti-globalist or anti-Davos crowd candidates like Bernie Sanders, like Ron Paul and others have been trying, Tulsi Gabbard to a lesser extent, going back all the way to Mike Gravel, going back to 2004, when Mike Gravel was on the stage screaming at people, right? I mean, remember all this stuff? Like, this has been pushed to the margins for decades in American politics, and it's wrong. And we keep wanting to have faith that the system can fundamentally overcome that the cheating, that a little bit of cheating is normal, right? It's not a big deal. Sometimes it's even entertaining to watch them how they go through it. As long as it's not more greater than the margin of the election, I don't really care, because it's a system that's run by humans and it's going to have faults in it. It's going to attract people who are going to want to cheat. It's going to incentivize some people at the fringes of the political perspective to want to cheat at some level. That's a fundamental criticism of elections in general. But as long as that level of fraud is less than, and it's kind of pedestrian fraud, is less than the margin of error, I don't care. Like, there's plenty of ballot fraud that happens in Florida, but notice how Florida gave us a conclusive answer this year, and they did it in 2.5 hours. Okay, because Florida's election system since 2000 has been buttoned up tight, and the technology is there and it works beautifully. Same thing in Texas. Okay, no matter what however you want to argue, for the most part, Texas and Florida led the way in showing us how to run a freaking election with 30 million people, or however many, 20, 30 million people, right? So now, what are we looking at? Why can't they get this right in Pennsylvania or Georgia or wherever it is? Because they identified that this is what they wanted to do. And this is intolerable at every level. And it highlights the libertarian argument that everything government touches, it destroys, because it encourages theft and fraud. It inspires people to become thieves and to become partisans and to think to themselves, I'm the good guy. I'm going to save the world from evil orange man bad. That's unacceptable behavior, but it is what it is. It's where we are, and it's who we are. It's in many ways, it's who many of us have become, and it's very sad. So now, on all sides of the political fence, as far as I'm concerned, we have to say, I do not consent to this. That these election results in all of these states are now, in my mind, permanently tainted.
Yeah, but Tom,
we can talk about how we go forward.
You don't know who won the race. Like you've admitted, just being on the show, that if they go through all of the test results, if they go through looking at the results again, and the lawsuits and everything else, and it still shows that Biden's won, then Biden wins. I mean, I guess I understand your point, though. Your point is the results are tainted regardless, because it looks dubious. I have regardless.
Yeah, that's your point. I looking at the numbers, looking at the Benford's law stuff, looking at all the election, looking at all of the election statistics of the past and all the rest of it. 89%.
Tom, we've got to go into a break here. I just want to jump in. I want to jump in and take us to a break. I'll be honest. I've looked around at the different fraud allegations. The one thing that actually has stood out to me is the Benford's law. Over on GitHub specifically, there's an analysis, live post and analysis of this stuff. That's the one thing. The thing there is, it's a small number of counties. I would want to, we can come back on the other side to talk about that. I would just want to see it applied to more counties. I want to see, specifically in the sort of swing counties and in the different precincts, analysis of different precincts. I'd want to see where and to what extent it was used. But, applying Benford's law, applying this sort of fraud detection, not algorithm, but it's just a statistical analysis to look at how results deviate from your expectations if you're going into it with a sort of random sample. Applying that definitely seems to be the best gauge of this. In any event, we'll come back. We can go into a bit more depth on that on the other side of this break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be right back.
Fault Lines.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And we are joined by Tom Luongo, geopolitical analyst and publisher of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter. Tom, we're talking about fraud as we went into the break in the last segment. I actually wanted to get there. I was letting you guys kind of talk it out because I'm genuinely in the middle on this one. I see some evidence of voter fraud, but I'm not buying into it. Early on, specifically in Michigan and Wisconsin, there were a couple of stories came out that I read through, and then alleging, 1 million plus ballots going to Biden, for instance, in the case of Michigan. In Wisconsin, there was this steep uptick at one point that, by the way, it's hidden by this graph, but it was matched by a slightly less steep, but a similar uptick in ballots going to Trump, where apparently they'd been tallying mail-in ballots, and then they all at once added them in Wisconsin. Anyway, there are these two charts floating around election night, the days following, of what was going down. I believe that was the charts were actually taken directly from the 538 website, incidentally, just throwing that in there. In any event, those quickly got some responses that were more or less plausible. And so I was like, I don't know what's going on here. Then over the weekend, this Benford's Law stuff started to hit, and it has not been picked up by the media at all. I really haven't seen it anywhere.
There's a blackout on it.
Yeah,
there's actually a blackout on Twitter about it.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Tom, can you explain?
Could
you just explain briefly what this is?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I've seen plenty of people say I've had my post taken down because I referenced Benford's Law.
I know, but the Benford Law stuff.
I traffic in those circles, dude. I don't know if you do or not, but I do.
I know. I understand you guys are going with the Benford's Law stuff. Just because somebody has a hypothesis about stuff, it doesn't necessarily means it applies.
No, it doesn't make it true, but it's like everything else, man. Statistics are statistics, okay? And I'm not going to tell you that I'm an expert on this or anything, but I've read enough about this and I've done enough statistics in my life. Remember, former research chemist, former data analyst. Like I've done this stuff for a living. I've forgotten stuff about statistics that most people never learn.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Benford's Law very simply says that look, it's certain that in any population of numbers, right, there's a specific distribution of the leading number in that group, and that tends towards 1 as being the most, the number 1 being the leading, most popular leading number, simply because of the way numbers work themselves out. And as you move through each order of magnitude of a sample size, there's a disproportionate number of them that will be led by the number 1 as you go through the process. And it's just the quirk of statistics. And you can read, I'm not going to go into much more detail than that here. Just understand that is it's a decaying exponential function from 1 down to 9. That 9 is the least likely and 1 is the most likely. And it's a downward sloping, gently sloping curve, or not even gently sloping curve, pretty steep decaying exponential curve. That's what it looks like. And we don't have anything close to that in a lot of these places. And so, and this is the simple, direct analytic tool used to uncover potential voter fraud. And it's used.
It's not a simple, direct analytical tool. Come on.
It is an absolutely simple and direct tool. Jamarl, I'm sorry, but this is used by international organizations, including the United States, to try and undermine vote totals in other countries and to elect and to create color revolutions in other countries. This is what we use. This is not simple. This is not esoteric. This is basic statistics. Okay. And I'm sorry if you disagree with that. I'm sorry I'm sorry at the end of the day, if like no one should be arguing for either Biden or Trump here. But we want the election.
Look, I'm not arguing for either side, but you're coming on basically making a very clear assertion that there's fraud. And I don't buy the fraud allegation without evidence. And evidence that you're using is basically this Binford's Law stuff as some kind of metric to determine whether or not there's fraud in the race. I'm saying that I don't trust Trump at all. And so him claiming fraud doesn't mean anything to me. What I need is evidence. And the fact that his own henchmen are basically saying, he either needs to show the evidence or keep it moving, adds more legitimacy to this point that I don't buy his claim. He needs to show it. Now, I'm not against him doing the lawsuits. I'm not against him doing the recounts. All of that stuff. Have at it. So this is not a position where I'm like, stop it all and Biden is... That's not where I am. I am at a position, I am skeptical of this claim, just like I was skeptical of the Russiagate stuff. And in the same way that the Russiagate stuff needs to be proven or shown, I'm the same way with this. My tenor hasn't changed. I guess that's my point. Or I don't have a dog in the hunt.
90% sure that this is a fraudulent election in at least 4 different states. Okay? I mean, that's how big the certainty is. That's how big the probabilistic errors and methodological errors are here. That Trump won by such a margin that they had to manufacture votes. They already had a system in place to flip votes in certain counties and then the whole 9 yards. Then the script here is a color revolution, just like has been performed in Belarus and Ukraine and other places around the world all the time. Bolivia, yada, yada, yada. The United States is getting the same treatment that everybody else has gotten, supposedly from just the United States, but it's really not that. It's absolutely a commingling of European and American power brokers on both sides of the Atlantic. And you can see it from the gleeful amount of joy that's coming from places like Germany. Like, this is very obvious at this point what the goal is here.
They did hate his guts.
And they're in the end of this right now of saying Trump has no chance of winning. He should just concede. This is normal. This is just like they did to Lukashenko 4 months ago in Belarus. This is nothing new. Like, it's the same thing. And Lukashenko won the election. He didn't win at 80-20. He won at 65-35. And Trump won by enough of a margin in a lot of these states that they have had to literally create as statistical impossibilities in order to make this work. And it's going to be uncovered.
So for Belarus for a moment, you believe that Lukashenko, messed around with the vote total. Why? If he was going to win that race, what was the point of screwing around with the vote tally?
Because like everything else, if you're a dictator, you want to create and Lukashenko is a dictator, unlike Putin, for example. Like, Lukashenko is a dictator, okay? And if you want to, quote unquote, remain, what's the word I'm looking for? Not relevant, dominant in your position, then you have to create the illusion of invincibility. And maybe he was actually worried about the color revolutionary forces that he knew were unleashed on his country. And so he engaged in some fraud to counteract their fraud. Like, that makes sense to me. I'm not saying it's right or wrong or anything else. This is not me condoning any of this behavior. This is me explaining it. Okay. I can see people's motivations for these things. And so usually everything is always murkier than it actually looks on first glance. And it just is, that is the way of these things. And we'll never get really good information. And maybe in this fight, we will finally uncover the decades worth of systemic voter fraud that's been going on in the United States for decades. And maybe finally we get it here. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Because if it's proven reasonably in a court, then the state legislatures may get involved because they're the ones who actually select the electors. Never forget that the election itself, the votes we cast as voters, are a guide for the state legislatures to do their job as constitutionally laid out.
A lot of people don't know that. It's just our opinion.
They don't. Vote, you don't have to convince you. Look, no, Trump doesn't have to convince you or me or anybody else. Trump has to convince a majority of state legislatures in those 9 states whose elections have been tainted at a minimum. and bring a strong enough case to have them reject the Democratic slate of electors, regardless of what the vote totals are, and say, no, we need to go with the Republicans. And then at that point, it goes even crazier. It goes to the House.
Well, that
and
gets
this is why House races Jamarl, that are currently sitting like flipped by 17% in places like New York and Iowa and others that have not been called yet. There is a couple of House races in New York where the Republican challenger is unseating the Democratic incumbent and flipping the seat by 15 or 16 points.
Yeah.
There's 4 of them, and they haven't been called yet, even though the numbers are insurmountable. Why? Because they're desperate to try and figure out a way to keep the Republicans from getting close to a majority in the House of Representatives.
You know what's interesting
that's what
with
this
that
is
one?
about. They see this. We're well beyond the original vote here. This is now into
that's
massive.
what gets interesting with this election, and that's where the whole thing of Donald Trump not conceding. So you could get a situation where this gets weirded enough, where you get so. Let's say, for example, some kind of fraud is shown. Let's say something comes out. Let's say Wisconsin or Michigan or something like that, and Republicans think, hey, maybe there is fraud here. And instead of them, kind of abandoning Trump on this, they stand by him. Then you get the states where it gets thrown to the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives going for the states. And there are more Republican states than Democrat states. So you could technically, strangely enough, end up with a situation where those state delegations choose Trump or some other Republican to take the presidency. It gets so weird. It gets weird. Right? I'm not making this up. This is the way this is the rule set.
Guys, that's how Lincoln was elected.
Yeah.
Lincoln was elected by a vote of the House of Representatives. You realize that, right? This is not unprecedented in American history. It just hasn't happened in recent memory. Okay? This is not unprecedented at all. The constitutional system works. It has chosen presidents in the past when the popular vote or the individual state elections did not declare a direct winner or a clear winner. And if there's any doubt at all over the validity of the vote totals in some of these states, then as far as I'm concerned, I don't even want their electors seated at the Electoral College. Like, that's what I want. I was like, bypass, we're done. You guys don't even get to send electors if you can't figure out how to run a freaking election. Because at the end of the day, it is the people's job to hold their state representatives feet to the fire about holding a proper election. And if their state representatives can't do that, then unfortunately, then you need to change your local state government and deal with it. And you're going to not, and you don't get to vote in this election and spoil it for the rest of us. Tough. You had your opportunity to run a fair election and you chose not to. Why should we, in states that ran a fair election, have to be governed by you? That's where I am. And I think that's a very fair point that everybody should be asking at this point. Why in the hell should we actually listen to anything that comes out of the mouths of the Pennsylvania state government at this point? We in Florida should be incensed at this. Texas should be incensed. And that is the basis for what really comes after this is all over, regardless of who is declared president or claims the presidency somewhere in January.
Tom, I would agree with you on this point, that it is problematic.
1 minute.
For, be it, with Trump, with the Russiagate stuff, or with this stuff, where it seems like each president is being delegitimized, regardless of the party.
Yep.
And a lot of that has to do with elections. A lot of that has to do with, not having a clear, transparent electoral system. So on that, I totally feel you. And on that very specific point, I do agree with you on it. This is geopolitical analyst and publisher of Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter, Tom Luongo. Tom, thank you for coming on, man. We appreciate it. You guys.
Thank you, guys. You have a good week.
Absolutely. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with headlines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back, coming to you from across the divided states of America, the most disruptive show covering news and events in those states, in the Independent Corner. I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall with my co-host Shane Stranahan, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Getting back into headlines in the news. Well, over the weekend, specifically on Saturday, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. was declared the president-elect as the states of Pennsylvania and Nevada swung in his direction as final votes came in. Of course, this is a matter of some dispute. As you just heard, if you were listening to our conversation with Tom Luongo on that, President Trump is pushing for a recount while holding a series of Trump rallies focused on the campaign's ongoing legal efforts in numerous states across the country. I just want to throw that in. This is a very Trumpian thing to do. While pushing for a recount, he's going to continue to hold rallies post-election. Didn't stop while he was president. Why would he stop now? The campaign is also sending recount teams to Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, President-elect Biden has promised to introduce a COVID-19 task force today, saying that the pandemic is the first of four major items his administration will focus on, the other three being the economy, racial justice, and climate change. Biden has said he will also reverse the Trump administration's immigration policies, including ending travel bans on majority Muslim countries and extending protections for DACA recipients. Neither China nor Russia have formally recognized Biden as the winner of America's presidential contest as of yet. You know what? I want to come back to this for just a second. We were talking about this during the last headlines, approximately 1 hour ago, approximately 60 minutes ago. We were talking about, I was saying, I see this as a sort of objective standing, as an objective, not closer to objective than most of these other countries. Germany, Oman, Jordan, a number of countries, Netanyahu and Israel, a number of countries came out very quickly and congratulated Biden and sort of ratified the results of our election. China and Russia are holding back. The reason I think that's significant is that they're not in our sphere of influence. There are other countries looking at us from the outside in. And you responded last time saying, well, no, they have a stake in this too. They're not objective. They're also biased in their own ways. They have preferences about who becomes the president. Our response to that is, sure they do, but I'm not sure which way those preferences go. And in the case of China, for instance, specifically, it seems to me like they would do better under Biden than they would under Trump. So if they're going to be biased, I would think that they would be biased against Trump and in favor of Biden. If you look at the last 4 years of pretty much constant trade war we've been engaged in with China, first ramping up early in his presidency and then actually implemented in the form of various sanctions and tariffs and restrictions, et cetera. I can't help but think they would lean the other way. But broadly, I didn't even mean to get into that in the last hour. Really, here's all that I mean. They're not in our sphere of influence. They're sort of, in some sense, as neutral a party as you're going to get on the world scale. There are competitors, sure, and that's going to flavor who they favor. But it's the fact that they're outside of us that literally, if you have a subjective objective dichotomy there, we are the subject. Countries within our sphere of influence are sort of part of that subject. They're not. They're outside of that. They're outside of the subject that we are. And to that extent, hopefully they can give us a more objective appraisal, looking at how they respond to us, looking at what they're saying, what they're not saying. Hopefully that can give us some more objective context than just what we and our various affiliates say and do. Jamarl, does that make sense? I
know what you're trying to get at. I do understand where you're trying to reach to. You're trying to basically say, look, like Germany, many of these countries are directly related to our foreign policy. Like we have military bases in their countries, for God's sake. Whereas Russia and China, you're trying to make a distinction between them versus, let's say, other countries in the West. I understand where you're going for it. I just don't think there's anything outside the frame. I just think everything is in the frame. I don't think it's like anywhere you are is where you're at. I don't think you can get out of it. But I do know what you're trying to reach to. I guess the question becomes, is there a difference in regards to foreign policy between a Biden and a Trump? And I think the answer is yes.
Oh, yeah.
Now, and I think the catch becomes, is it advantageous or disadvantageous to China and Russia depending upon the person? And I think that's where we get into disagreement. Because I do think there's a difference. Like for example, Trump and China, for example. Trump was belligerent. Trump has had all of these trade wars and everything else. But if Biden implements the Trans-Pacific Partnership or some other trade deal like that, where he's sewing up a large part of the world's trade, that's going to go directly against the Belt and Road Initiative that China is trying to push. And it just seems like these are competing views of the world. And these competing views of the world are just as competitive as what Trump was. And I would even say maybe even more effective. So I don't know. I just don't see any of these guys being out the frame. To me, all of these guys are in the frame. But I do see where you're trying to reach for. You're trying to make the point that Canada, Germany, all of these guys hate his guts because they hate his guts.
Well, yeah,
they're like loving the fact that Joe Biden is back. No, I get what you're trying to reach for. I get it.
Specifically, that's totally true. I guess, and this fundamentally is a philosophical thing. But if there is nothing outside the frame, if there is no frame, then we shouldn't even use the words objective or subjective because they have no meaning. It's you're trying to sort of make a distinction without any difference. It's just noise. I think that there's something to it other than the noise. That there is, there is a frame. There are things that are closer to that frame, things that are, more biased at the center. Anyway, that's a longer philosophical conversation. And I think we should get back into headlines here. In general political news, in the U.S., runoff elections are due to begin next month in Georgia for two races that will decide whether Republicans continue to control the Senate. In the general election, Republican incumbent David Perdue will be running against Democratic contender John Ossoff, while in Georgia's special election, Democrat Raphael Warnock will be running against Republican Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed by Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp following the resignation of former Senator Johnny Isakson in 2019. Democrat Speaker of the House, actually on Loeffler, I'm just going to throw this in there for a second. I believe that her husband is like the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange.
I think so too.
I want to go back and just double check this.
I think you're right.
It's just,
let me check. I'll check it. But I think you're right.
It's ugly. I'm kind of doing this from memory. I was looking into this morning, and so I'm pretty sure it's the New York Stock Exchange, but it might be another sort of similar entity. But pretty sure it is the NYSE. And I don't like that.
Oh, wait a minute. Is this right? Yeah. Jeff Craig Sprecher, American businessman and founder, chairman, CEO of the Intercontinental Exchange, and chairman of the New York Stock Exchange.
That's pretty ugly, right? That's not cool. Like, I feel like just sort of on its face, politicians should be a lot more distinct from, direct business interests. And anyway,
So wait, that's fascinating. So should she get a divorce? Should she not be able to run for politics? How should that work? Because I agree with you. There should be a bar on that door. That's far too close. When she was selling her stocks.
Yeah, the voters should not put her in. The Republican Party, the Georgia Republican Party should not be trying to put her. We should have higher standards than that. That's the hope, at least. We like on both sides, whether it's the voters or it's the party apparatus, shouldn't be doing that. I don't know about putting laws into place. That seems pretty stringent, and that could go wrong pretty quickly. But culturally, and in terms of the institutions, culturally from the voters' perspective, and in terms of institutional health and vitality, all that stuff, they should frown on that. They should be like, no, we're not going to sink to that low standard. Anyway. Back to the headlines, I think. Democrat Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has announced that she'll be running for re-election in 2022. This comes days after deferring the question while the election was ongoing. Meanwhile, in an interview with the New York Times, popular Democrat Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said she had almost considered dropping out of politics, saying that, quote, the last 2 years have been pretty hostile. Externally, we've been winning. Externally, there's been a ton of support, but internally, it's been extremely hostile to anything that even smells progressive, end quote. I wonder how progressives smell. That's an awkward question to ask, but she did ask it herself in a sense.
Earthy.
Kind of wonder.
Earthy.
Man. I've lived in Portland, Oregon. I was at one point thinking of myself as a progressive, and I did smell earthy, but in a pleasant way, like rosemary and thyme, maybe even parsley and sage. Anyway, in COVID news, Pfizer this morning announced that its coronavirus vaccine is more than 90% effective at protecting people compared with a placebo saline shot. This comes according to an interim analysis conducted by an independent committee that met on Sunday. That's optimistic. That's hopeful, even if it's going to be a short-lived vaccine in the sense that it seems like people's immunity fades pretty quickly. You lose your immunity to COVID after a number of months, a smaller number of months than you'd like. So there's this lingering question of what good a vaccine is going to do, assuming that immunity is temporary. But hey, if you give it to people in waves, I don't know. There's an argument to be made there. Again, slightly rosy news. This comes as the worldwide situation is looking a little bit less rosy. The United States reported its 10 millionth coronavirus case on Sunday, with the latest million cases added in just 10 days, as most of the country struggled to contain outbreaks in the third and most widespread wave of infection since the pandemic began. More than 103,600 new cases were announced on Sunday. That's the fifth highest total of the pandemic so far, and the fifth day in a row that the country exceeded 100,000 cases in a single day. The 7-day average of new cases now exceeds 111,000 per day, far more than any other country. The U.S. accounts for about 1/5 of all reported coronavirus cases in the world, a total that has now passed 50.2 million globally. COVID-19 deaths are also on the rise, though not yet as steeply as case reports. As of Sunday afternoon, more than 237,000 people had died from the virus in the United States, and the 7-day average of deaths per day was over 900 for the first time since August. The CDC predicts that the toll could reach 256,000 by November 21st. In Italy, meanwhile, over in Europe, on the continent, 39,809 new coronavirus cases were reported on Saturday. That's a new daily record. Its daily average has increased by 119% over the past 2 weeks. Deaths, meanwhile, have spiked by 232% over the past 2 weeks, with 425 deaths reported on Saturday. France reported a record 60,486 new cases on Friday and 40,439 new cases on Saturday. While the daily average there has risen by 57% over the past 2 weeks, deaths have increased by 170% in the same time frame. And on Sunday, that's yesterday, 9 of the 10 countries with the highest average daily case totals per person were in Europe, including the Czech Republic, that's the 3rd highest, Switzerland, that's the 4th highest, and France, which is the 8th highest. In news on the Azerbaijani-Armenian war, Azerbaijan said on Sunday that its forces had captured the key town of Shusha from Armenian separatists in Nagorno-Karabakh, but Armenia insisted that fighting continued for that area. The town sits atop a mountain, and control of it would be critical in deciding the outcome of the conflict. This comes after the website Middle East Eye said that the sides could be close to agreeing to a new ceasefire. They were citing Turkish sources. The deal would involve Armenia withdrawing from some areas and the deployment of peacekeeping troops from both Russia and Turkey. Also this weekend, specifically, I think it actually was released this morning, Azerbaijan's president gave a lengthy interview to the BBC in which he said he would call off Azerbaijan's advance if Armenia withdrew its forces from the Armenian-occupied territories surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh, but has also said that he sees no chance of negotiating a deal with Armenia's current president. Those seem a little bit contradictory. In the first clause of that sentence right there, I'm representing the interview. It's not like I'm quoting from him directly. Anyway, in the first clause of that sentence there, he's saying that he would be willing to withdraw if this term is met, specifically if Armenia pulls back. In the second sense, he doesn't see a chance of negotiating a deal. He's not gonna come to a deal. Those two seem to contradict each other. Anyway, this also comes as this morning a Turkish outlet has reported that Azerbaijan has taken 23 more villages in the vicinity of Shusha. So it seems, if you can trust that, it seems like that offensive is picking up some momentum there. Sad to say, a lot of people's lives are on the line. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed replaced his army chief, the head of intelligence, and the foreign minister on Sunday as the military continued a 5-day-old offensive in the Tigray region with a new round of airstrikes. This comes after he said on Friday that ongoing military operations in the country's north that have stoked fears of civil war, quote, have clear, limited, and achievable objectives, end quote. On Twitter, Abiy accused the TPLF of criminal hubris and intransigence, claiming they rejected the federal government's efforts at mediation, reconciliation, and dialogue. And in Hong Kong, 19 opposition lawmakers have said they would resign en masse if the central Chinese government in Beijing disqualifies any of them. The convener of that camp said that any move by Beijing to disqualify the legislators and prevent them from doing their duties would be ridiculous. Media reports in Hong Kong, including from the South China Morning Post, said that the 4 lawmakers would be accused of filibustering meetings and violating their oaths of office. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're going into a break. We'll be back on the other side of this break with Caleb Maupin. You're listening to Fault Lines. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And we are now joined by our guest for this segment and the next, Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. It's the title. Examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, that was a prescient book to write, considering the fact that she is now the vice president elect. Thank you for being with us. Good timing there.
Sure. Yeah, glad to be here.
Absolutely. I'll just start like this. What do you think of the past week since the election took place? I kind of don't know where you're sitting on a bunch of this stuff. Obviously, harsh divide in the U.S. We've been bringing to light on this show. It is Fault Lines, after all, between Democrats and Republicans, and more widely between different branches of the American public over whether or not President-elect Biden is actually the president-elect, whether Trump won this thing, whether the voter fraud is, whether those allegations have any merit, which is really the big bone of contention here. Where do you fall on that, Caleb?
Well, it looks to me like Biden won this. I mean, I'm not ruling out the possibility of fraud, and I think there's fraud and foul play in every election. But it looks to me like, in order for Trump to really prove that he should be the president-elect, he's got a very big burden of proof on his hands. There's a lot of things he would have to show. Hundreds of thousands of votes would have to be forged. He would have to really, really go out of his way. And I'm not convinced. At this point, it looks to me like Biden is being recognized as the president-elect. One person here, didn't get a ballot, or one person. There's a lot that needs to be proved to say otherwise. So until I see some really, really substantial proof that hundreds of thousands of votes were completely forged, I think that Biden is the legit winner of this election, despite whatever foul play that went on, which goes on in every vote. Here in New York, a couple people got arrested for trying to vote under the names of dead people. That happened on Election Day. Bad things happen. One thing that is worth pointing out is that, if you were to put the U.S. elections under a microscope, the way elections in Venezuela are, elections in Bolivia are, the way elections in Russia are, there's a lot of things that wouldn't stand up. There's a lot of people talking about, for example, there's a guy, there was David Andal, who died before the election and was running for office for the U.S. Or for the North Dakota State General Assembly, State House of Representatives. He was running for office. He died. And so the day before the election, the governor of North Dakota tried to replace him with somebody else who would be on the ticket instead. The attorney general of the state of North Dakota stepped in and said, no, you can't. And this guy who died, David Andal, he actually won. He won the election, so he was elected. And the people of North Dakota still don't know who it was that they were voting for when they voted for this dead man who died of COVID-19. And now they also don't know who is going to take his seat.
What do you mean, Caleb? This is pretty straightforward. They're going to drag the corpse. They're going to sit the corpse in the seat.
Yeah. This is pretty ridiculous. The other thing is that if you look at, in Russia's elections, they will often talk about regions in the Russian Caucasus, in the Caucasus Mountains, where, there'll be one candidate who will get like 80-90% of the vote, and they'll declare that to be suspicious. And if you look at these election results we had here in the United States, in San Francisco, in Washington, D.C., and in some urban areas, Biden got 80-90% of the vote. Now, I don't think that that's necessarily false. I think that that's pretty legitimate. I think there is widespread contempt, for Donald Trump in those areas. But if it's suspicious for a tiny village in the Russian Caucasus to have 80-90%, for one candidate, why is it not suspicious for Washington, D.C. or San Francisco? So I think that the double standards from how we judge elections. Let's be real, okay? Puerto Rico had no say in who became the president. Neither did the Virgin Islands, neither did the Northern Mariana Islands, neither did Guam. Could you imagine if Venezuela, they had a bunch of provinces and territories that had no say in who got to be president of Venezuela? Can you imagine the outrage there would be over here? Can you imagine the outrage if in Russia they said they were going to have their election on a Tuesday, on a working Tuesday, and that, there'd be big lines before to go to work and before you go to work to vote, big lines to vote after work. The USA is quite hypocritical in the way it holds its elections with its outdated electoral college system and all kinds of things to be judging other countries' elections. That said, it looks to me like Biden won this, but, Trump is contesting it, and I don't rule it out. I don't think that the idea that some foul play went on should be off limits to discuss. Look, for the last 4 years, all over the media, there's been nothing but questioning of the 2016 results, right? It was all a big Russian conspiracy, collusion, but now we have results from the 2020 election, and you're not allowed to question them. And that's a bit of a double standard. I think people should be free to question things as they wish and look into the facts and details. If we can question the 2016 election for 4 straight years, I think we should be allowed to question these elections.
I agree with you on that. I have no issue with Donald Trump filing his lawsuits. I have no issue with these guys doing recounts. I think all that stuff is on the table. I want to know who won. And I was fine with the recounts back in 2016. Why wouldn't I be okay with the recounts now? And you're right. They basically said that the Russians destroyed democracy in 2016. And they've been screaming it for 4 years, despite the fact that one plank of that after the next was basically torched. One lawsuit after the next. Not to mention Mueller couldn't even give the goods. And the one who owned, the CEO of Sean Henry, if I'm not mistaken his name, the CEO of CrowdStrike, even admitted in buried congressional testimony that they didn't have any evidence that the Russians did it. Or that even information was even pulled out. And so it's like they hid this stuff of all of these years. And like you said, they delegitimized Donald Trump's presidency from day one. And now all of a sudden, like you say, everybody has supposed to shut up and fall in line and we're not supposed to ask for recounts and all. Yeah, nonsense. If you could do it back in 2016, then I see no issue with Donald Trump checking and investigating now. None. Zero. And so I have no issue with that at all. Let me ask you this. What do you think a Biden administration even means? Because at this point, I am dramatically unclear about what that means. Nobody pushed him for anything. The lefties never pushed him for anything. They didn't require anything of him. The only thing required of Biden is to not be Donald Trump, which is a low, low, low bar. So what does it mean for Biden administration? And we may actually be talking about a Harris administration, assuming that Biden makes it the 4 years, which I'm in doubt.
Well, the thing is that when Obama took office, when Biden became vice president back in 2008, those were the circumstances in which the Bush administration had largely failed in a number of areas, alienated European allies, it alienated a lot of the Muslim world, and there had been a big, huge financial meltdown. And Obama came in, with kind of a mandate, on behalf of the more liberal wing of the ruling class to kind of fix up what Bush had wrecked. This is a very different situation because, the neoconservatives, John Bolton, George W. Bush, all of them were backing Biden this time. And Biden essentially ran, while it was a Democratic ticket, it was really a joint Republican-Democrat anti-Trump ticket. And that he's already announced that his administration is going to be full of former Bush administration people. Michelle Flournoy is going to be Secretary of Defense. And I mean, this is going to be a bipartisan establishment administration. This is going to be to the right of the Obama administration. The Obama administration was a big, disaster and a big disappointment to a lot of progressive people. But this is going to be something that will be significantly to the right of the Obama administration. This is just largely a repudiation of Donald Trump. This is the establishment coming together. This is, the fact that Ohio Republican John Kasich, was kind of key in the campaign of Biden. We're going to get something much more conservative. That said, though, I think we can already tell that there will be a lot of symbolic victories, for progressive people, and that's what Kamala Harris is all about. And we've seen a lot of that already. There's going to be a lot of street names that are changed. There's going to be a lot of maybe new monuments built or old monuments torn down. There'll be a lot of symbolic changes and a lot of, quote unquote woke rhetoric. But in terms of policy, I think we're going to face an administration that is significantly to the right of Barack Obama.
Wait, real quick.
Where do you think that breaks down?
Kamala Harris a symbolic win for the left?
Well, she's already talking about the fact that she is the first woman to ever be vice president, that she's the first, woman of color to be vice president. She's the first Indian American. And she's already talking about, the need to defeat, quote unquote, systemic racism. And she's using left-wing rhetoric in a lot of ways. But at the same time, in terms of actual policy, I don't think we're going to see actual left-wing policy implemented from the Biden administration just based on who they're appointing now. But I do think there will be a lot of symbolic and rhetorical left-wing rhetoric in terms of identity politics, in terms of changing the way people think, in terms of, I think that kind of thing is expected to happen for sure. There is going to be there will be a left side to the rhetoric of the administration. But in terms of policy, it will be a lot like the Bush administration, honestly.
Where do you think that goes, Caleb, specifically on that issue, the idea of giving some symbolic concessions to the left, but materially making no real progress? Does that break down at some point? Can that persist? What do you think is the ultimate consequence of doubling down on that kind of thing?
Well, I think that our foreign policy is going to be much more consistent under the administration of Biden. The Trump administration's foreign policy seemed very, very erratic and seemed to change day to day. And it seemed like there was more of an isolationist wing of the White House. And then there was a very strong interventionist wing of the White House. And then Trump was always trying to keep, Netanyahu and his crowd very happy and trying to keep, the folks that hate Venezuela and Cuba very, very happy in Latin America, but also announcing he was going to pull the troops out and then not pulling the troops out and, troops in Syria and then troops not in Syria. And that the Trump administration didn't really know what it was doing in terms of foreign policy. I think the Biden administration is going to be very consistent in what they do. And I think that what they do will be to, escalate tension with, anti-imperialist states around the country, around the world, and to work to advance the interests long-term and strategically of American capitalism. It won't be as dramatic and erratic. I think it'll be much more predictable, but in the long term, it will mean the greater danger for war, and that's something that all of us should be deeply concerned about.
One other side of this, just to push back very slightly, a lot of the concerns that people had about Trump was exactly how unpredictable he was and the fact that, the possibility, that could lead us into some greater conflict. On the other hand, You used the word predictable. I think that is one of the main upsides of Biden. For the investor class and the political class alike, Biden is somebody you can rely on to sort of do more or less what you think he's going to do. In any event, Caleb, we'll be back with Caleb Maupin on the other side of this break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. Joining us is Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise in prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse and geopolitical stage. Let's go there for a moment, because my contention, and this is my own little pet conspiracy theory, and I don't think it's just mine. Other people have mentioned it, but I do think there's some merit to it, is that the Kamala Harris in the vice presidential spot was put as an end around. The American public didn't particularly like her. She ends up getting crushed in the debates. However, she is close to the Clinton wing of the party. There's communications apparently back between her and the Clinton camp. And so you have her as a fixture on Biden's staff as a giveaway of sorts, in optics only, to blacks. Basically, shut up, in the way Claiborne says, shut up about this stuff about you being taken advantage of by the Democratic Party. Here's Kamala Harris. The cop thing, meaning when Donald Trump keeps saying, Biden is going to defund the police and Biden is going to attack the cop. Well, you just put in a top cop who doesn't necessarily have that particular point of view. And you put in somebody who's a female, meaning she hits it on all 3 metrics. You allow a certain continuity in regards to the Democratic Party, the politics, and what these guys want to push, while having this kind of optical change on the outside. I really do think that what needs to be discussed, and what wasn't necessarily discussed during the presidential election, is Kamala Harris. Presidents, if you look at Obama, if you look at Clinton, even if you look at George Bush, Trump bucked the trend on this. But presidents degrade fast. They degrade fast. The burden, the pressure, all of this other stuff. And Joe Biden is coming in as a, octogenarian. He's going to be one of the oldest presidents that we have. And let's just be very clear, he is a wisp of the man that he used to be. So the question becomes, does Joe Biden last for the 4 years? And if not, then the question and the person who you need to be really focusing on to some degree is Kamala Harris. And the policies that Kamala Harris would implement, the foreign policy she would implement, and domestic policy. This, to me, Kamala Harris is a craven political actor. And this is, the appropriating Medicare for all, the appropriating the Green New Deal, while not necessarily backing any of that stuff in any real terms. It's craven. I mean, even the political career in California. So what does it mean to have a Kamala Harris as president? Because I do honestly believe that could be more than pretty much any time in our history. That is a very real reality that could take place.
I think that it means that a particular faction that has a lot of influence in Silicon Valley is back in the administration. They're back in the executive branch. That it's very clear that when it was made clear that Hillary Clinton could not run again in 2020 as much as she wanted to. Hillary Clinton's backers had some meetings in Long Island, New York, in the Hamptons, and they put their support behind Kamala Harris. And this is considered a matter of fact. I mean, you can Google this, that all the key donors to Hillary Clinton's campaign gave their money to Kamala Harris. The Hillary Clinton faction backed Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris became their candidate. The media was cheering for her. She took center stage at the debate. She was, getting a lot of attention. And then Tulsi Gabbard made a point of using her limited time on the debate stage to expose her record. And she immediately sunk in the polls and did abysmally in the Democratic primary. I mean, barely anybody voted for her in the Democratic primary. But some maneuvers were made, and now she is the vice president-elect. And it's pretty clear that that faction that Hillary Clinton and her State Department represented, that worked behind the back of the Obama administration in many instances to foment chaos around the world, that particular faction is going to have a lot of influence in the Biden administration. And I mean, let's look at the facts, right? I mean, as soon as Obama comes into office, there are protests going on in Iran. And without asking the president of the United States, Jared Andrew Cohen, who is a Google Alphabet employee who now works for the Hillary Clinton State Department, goes to Twitter and says to them to basically change something that they're doing in order to help the destabilization and protests in Iran. And Jared Andrew Cohen does this without Obama's permission. So the Obama administration finds out that somebody from the State Department is going to Twitter and telling them, what to do and on behalf of the State Department, and tries to fire Jared Andrew Cohen for doing that. And Hillary Clinton steps in and protects Jared Andrew Cohen from being fired. Jared Andrew Cohen, who's a Google Silicon Valley guy, is somebody who's very key in the Hillary Clinton State Department's operation. During the Arab Spring, the role of Twitter, the role of Facebook, as well as the role of Al Jazeera are all very essential in kind of manipulating the chaos of the Arab Spring in order to carry out, the goal of toppling the government of Libya, trying to topple the Syrian government, creating huge instability in Syria and a huge, massive refugee crisis. And that, Silicon Valley and certain entities in Silicon Valley, it's an open fact that we wouldn't have Silicon Valley if it wasn't for some actually very bold and ingenuitive thinking on the part of our intelligence agencies. The free market was not going to create Silicon Valley, but it was some bold thinking on the part of the CIA, the NSA, and other intelligence agencies realized that when it came to computers, we had the resources to invest in the computer revolution, and the Soviet Union did not. And the Soviet Union, they had home computer. They had developed a home computer system in the 80s, and they had their computers, but they didn't have anywhere near the resources that we have in the United States. And it was really the intelligence community that loaned the money that was able to help, set up what eventually became Microsoft, IBM, Apple, Google. Silicon Valley is largely the creation of the intelligence agencies. They strategically had the government get involved and make sure that the computer revolution could really be strongest here in the United States, and in particular in Southern California. The Silicon Valley elites, right? Among them, there are different factions. But I'll encourage you to take a look at a book that was published called The Aquarian Conspiracy. And this was a book that was written by Marilyn Ferguson, who was Al Gore's spiritual advisor. And she was one of these strange New Age occultists, but she was the spiritual advisor to Al Gore. But the book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, was endorsed by some of the largest intellectuals associated with the CIA, like Arthur Kessler, like the famous psychologist Carl Rogers, who has come forward and said basically I would not be the top voice in psychology if it were not for the CIA. And you look at The Aquarian Conspiracy by Marilyn Ferguson, this strange New Age occultist book that was published in the 1980s. And towards the end, she's talking about how she says America is free, but California is freer, and she starts hailing certain think tanks associated with Stanford University and certain think tanks in Southern California that are engaging in social research, which now are revealed all to be kind of CIA think tanks. And you look at this text, The Aquarian Conspiracy, it's calling for some kind of global uprising, some kind of global unleashing of chaos in order to carry out an agenda of creating freedom. There's a new wave in the world. She says it's not pro-communist or anti-communist. It's just freedom and thought. Take a look at that text. That is how a lot of people in the intelligence agencies, a lot of people in Silicon Valley, and a lot of people that were in the Hillary Clinton State Department feel. They want a global explosion of chaos in order to carry out their agenda of freedom. And we saw that during the Arab Spring, and we saw some very catastrophic results as a result of the chaos these people unleashed. This all sounds like a lot of disconnected things that may not necessarily be connected, but look into Marilyn Ferguson, look into Southern California, look into where Silicon Valley came from. There's a lot of things here that all point to a certain worldview that is a worldview that I think many people in our military, many people within our government apparatus are very, very afraid of. Look, Tulsi Gabbard, there's a reason that she took aim at Kamala Harris, right? Kamala Harris was the person that she chose her limited time on the debate stage to go after. Tulsi Gabbard is active duty U.S. military. And Tulsi Gabbard, I think, represents a lot of people within the government who are very, very afraid of the chaos that Silicon Valley created, working with the Hillary Clinton State Department, trying to manipulate the events of the Arab Spring in 2011.
Caleb, interesting conversation. I'm going to ask this question. Haven't they sort of been hoisted by their own petard, assuming that this is true, assuming everything you're talking about, factual? Hasn't this come back, and haven't the chickens come home to roost in some sense with the chaos argument specifically? Isn't that 2016 and Trump? Isn't that kind of what happened here? This whole argument about the free flow of information, sort of breaking down institutional boundaries. I like that. I don't like chaos per se, but in some sense, looking at historically sclerotic journalistic organizations and deeply problematic political institutions that could do with a bit of uprooting. Isn't that in some sense coming back, again, assuming that was the original intent, was to spread this overseas, which it definitely wasn't the case of the Hillary Clinton State Department, like you're talking about with the Arab Spring, Ukraine, various color revolutions. But isn't that sort of hurting the United States at this point too? What's your take?
Well, we've been still trying. I mean, we've spent the last, 4 or 5, maybe even, since the Arab Spring, really, we've been trying to pick up the pieces of the damage that was done. I mean, look at the refugee crisis. Look at Libya now and how, Libya was once the most prosperous country on the African continent, highest life expectancy. Now Libya is an absolute disaster. People are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out of the crisis. Just the utter disaster created in Libya by the regime change operation that was fomented by the Hillary Clinton State Department and Silicon Valley. Take a look at Syria and the refugee crisis that was created there. I mean, this policy of destabilizing countries around the world and spreading chaos in the name of freedom, as Marilyn Ferguson, Al Gore's spiritual advisor, writes about in her book, The Aquarian Conspiracy. She's writing about this as Silicon Valley is essentially being built in the 1980s, that the goal is to just spread freedom and chaos across the globe. We're still dealing with the disaster of that. I mean, take a look at Central America. Right after Obama takes office, the first coup that happens is the military in Honduras overthrows the elected government of Manuel Zelaya. And Barack Obama hears about it, and he says, well, that's not legal. He doesn't know what's going on. Little does he know that the Hillary Clinton State Department had actually met with the coup plotters, with the generals, Michelete and others, that overthrew the Honduran government. And why did they overthrow the elected president of Honduras? They overthrew him because they thought he was a socialist. They thought he was moving toward, the Venezuelan and Bolivian side. So ever since then, Honduras has been a mess of chaos. Honduras has, I think, the highest murder rate in the world at this point.
They took him out in his pajamas, if I'm not mistaken. And Clinton was like, no, that's not a coup at all. The military just escorted the president out in his PJs at night. It's like, clearly it was a coup. That State Department, Hillary Clinton, I mean, whether it was Libya or whether it was the Honduras thing, I mean, the havoc, to put it mildly. And I didn't realize that Obama didn't know that Clinton was doing these things. Like, I knew about the Libya one, where the Libya conflict, Obama said that was the biggest mistake of his presidential career. But I didn't realize that he did not know what she was doing in that State Department office. That's horrendous. But let's end it here. Caleb, I always appreciate you coming on, man. I always enjoy these conversations. I'm going to check this book out, The Aquarian Conspiracy by Merlin Ferguson. And I'm going to check that out. So thank you for the heads up on that one. The voice you guys have been listening to, Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise of prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back for the wrap.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global political and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunday, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and we are taking your calls. Phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. The phone lines are open, and we have Tarif from New Orleans. What's going on, Tarif?
Good morning, gentlemen. I have a long comment, but before I get to that comment, Kurt Rivy and Bill Benning, I need to have on your show. Okay. That's my advice. Okay, January 20 is gonna come around, and they're still gonna be fighting in the courts, and Nancy Pelosi is gonna take over what Mark from North Carolina said when I listened to George Galloway. It makes sense because it's gonna take 4 or 5, 6 months to work out in the courts. That's what Trump should do, in my opinion. Since he got a full hand with these classifications, he played half the cards. He declassified RFK, Malcolm X, MK Ultra, Project MODOK, Church Committee, and some other assassinations that took place years ago. And he tell the public if he's re-elected again, if he win his case, what he's going to do is he's going to declassify the RFK, John F. Kennedy file, the MLK files, UFOs, if there's this or whatnot, and other things that's important. What that's going to do, that's going to create a whole bunch of pressure on Nancy Pelosi because people might be start pushing her, looking at her. Hey, you going to declassify these things, Nancy? Trump already did half of it. He said, declassify everything else. And also, that's going to put some lefties and libertarians on Trump's side and energize his base again. So I think that's a good strategy that he can do. He play half his hand now, just declassify some things now. Then he tell the public, I declassify the rest of it when I get in office again. I'm just throwing that out there, ladies and gentlemen.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for the call, Tarif. Jamarl, what do you think?
I think Trump is going to lose this. I don't think this is going to go 6 months. He has no... Look, it's one thing if Trump had institutional support, meaning he had Republicans like in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania, or Republicans in Wisconsin and some of these other states that are saying Trump is right, these are gamed, and we need to push back, and we're going to send our new elector. But that doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, his own henchmen seem to be backing away from him. People like Mitch McConnell, I don't think liked Trump to begin with. I think many of these people didn't necessarily like Trump. I think Trump's main thing was that he could win. And at the moment where it looks like he could not win, his institutional support and the people who were backing him up drained away. I mean, don't get me wrong. He's going to have the Rudy Giulianis of the world out there fighting for him. You might even get the Ted Cruz's of the world fighting for you, or the Lindsey Grahams. But these people are political actors. That's all they are. And from the standpoint of having enough people where they were going to send these electors, and where they were willing to put themselves up, and whether they were willing to tear the country apart, they're not there. I don't see it. I don't think this goes 6 months. I think right now, with the Secret Service boosting up around Joe Biden, basically clearing the air cover around his house, they're making a choice in regards to who is going to be president. And right now, I think it seems it's going to be Biden. It doesn't seem like the lawsuits are going to go anywhere. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. And I'm not saying stop the lawsuits. I'm not saying stop Trump from pushing. None of that stuff. I'm just saying in the end, it doesn't seem like people are backing him.
Which Republicans are you talking about? I mean, so I've seen Rick Santorum. I've seen former Governor Chris Christie come out, sort of against Trump on this case. But you mentioned Giuliani.
We're against is too strong. I don't. It doesn't seem like they're against them. It seems like their
Mitch
thing
McConnell
is
possibly
show
Bush,
evidence.
former President Bush. You've had a number of sort of high-profile Republicans either not congratulating Biden or saying that they think that Trump has a case. Yeah. Bush specifically, the fact that Bush is doing that, going up against Gore back in 2000, that's significant in a weird way. But the Republicans a lot of them are staying out of it, which is definitely not in Trump's favor. But they're also not congratulating Biden. You had Kristi Noem from South Dakota making a bunch of noise on ABC, in favor of Trump, against Biden on this, calling for a recount. It seems like they're a bit split, but I wouldn't say that he doesn't have institutional support. It's just, it seems like people are sort of waiting.
Well, I'm not against the recounts. Like I said, do the recounts. I thought Hillary Clinton should have had the recounts. I thought that was insane that she didn't do that, especially for as close as the votes were in like Wisconsin and some of those states. I guess my thing is, those Republicans that are standing on the sidelines, that's not support. If you know what I mean. Meaning from the standpoint of Trump. And, just because they're not congratulating Biden, I'm not necessarily think they're thrilled that Biden is in, but I kind of agree with Caleb on this. It's the return of the establishment. It's like the establishment strikes back. And with all of these traditional Republicans that were basically backing the Biden administration, yeah, I think Trump is going to have a hard way to go with it. I just don't think this goes 6 months. I just honestly don't. I don't even know if this goes to the Supreme Court. I'm not even certain of that anymore. So we'll see. I mean,
what about the possibility? Here's the thing, Jamarl. What about the possibility that there was serious election fraud and that it never gets uncovered? Because, like you're saying, there's no institutional momentum to do that. It's like a Schrodinger's cat situation. How are you going to know?
There's no way to know.
Where does that?
Unfortunately, there's no way to know. Yeah, but that's going back for God knows how long. How many elections?
Where does that leave you, like, emotionally and conceptually? I mean, because for me, that seems pretty damn frustrating, and I can feel something about that. But there's also, I'm sensing this detachment, and I'm just curious, both as a human being, but also, we're talking politics. Where do you think that leaves you? Where do you think that leaves the American public? I mean, we're talking about long-term polarization, a long-term sort of historical polarization. It seems like this is just another push of the pendulum, where it's increasing this divide, increasing this, the volatility of the oscillation between these two different fundamentally opposed perspectives in America. Well, yeah, what's your take?
So I'll say where it leaves me is not important. Where it leaves the public is. Where it leaves me, I'm desensitized to a lot of the stuff. I look at the stuff from a perspective of as if it's a game being played. It's a distinction between it. But that's how I almost have to, just to even do the job. But from the standpoint of the American public, the problem is that in a country that at one point people did have this idea of America and have it where the political parties, whether what they wanted, all of those things were subordinate to the idea of America. And right now, you have the system where both sides delegitimize the other when they win. So the notion that one person wins and both sides acknowledge that the person won, for some reason, seems to be getting farther and farther apart. And I'm telling you, that is disastrous. I mean, the moment that you get to the point where it's not just this kind of intellectual, I don't believe that guy won, but whether it's a clear material, I don't believe that guy won. And you have 10, 20 million people who are not accepting the election results and vocally not accepting it, overtly not accepting it. I think that leads to disaster.
More than that.
I think it just leads to disaster. And I have a hard time, I don't see where this ends. I mean, think about 2016. The Russians supposedly toppled democracy. And in this one, it's like, no, there's also cheating in this one. So in the last two elections, you have groups that just don't accept, regardless of what happens, that the other side won it. And I suspect in 2024, the same. It just seems like we are delegitimizing people in a way where the person who wins almost becomes secondary. At some point, it splits. Your country can't keep going in this in this direction where it just seems like truth doesn't matter and the reality doesn't matter. That's a problem. That's severely problematic. I mean, think about it. Like Obama didn't get his Supreme Court pick because of politics. You had Trump where they tried to take him out in a soft coup, screaming the Russians, even though there was no real evidence for it. It was basically a conspiracy theory that almost toppled the president of the United States. In this one, you have people screaming fraud, and they have no idea. They're just coming at like a whole cloth. The politics of it is mattered more. Like, honestly, like, think for yourself. Where does this end? Like, either something has to come to grips where this stuff mends, or it goes chaotic. And I don't necessarily see it mending. It just seems like it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah, or it gets papered over by some statesman in the future. We've got a caller. Brave, calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on the line. What's going on?
What's going on, guys? I think Jamarl kind of hit that dead on the head. I think that Trump provided. It would seem like Trump provided a very good opportunity for the establishment to finally correct course and take us into a very strong Orwellian form of government, because truth doesn't matter anymore, and they've embraced it. I think Trump brought that into us, right, or brought us into the space of creating truth. And I think the establishment saw it as I think the establishment, corporate media, just the corporate entity at large saw it as an opportunity, and they are embracing it. Because look at it, like you're saying, someone wins, no one believes it. You can't trust the media to tell you anything. No one will believe them anymore anyways, right? And now, even if you check out like progressive media or an independent media, they're sniping at each other. And I know a lot of that is emotions because of the elections, but it just seems like truth has been thrown, any sense of real truth has been thrown out of the window. And now it's all about emotions and ruling people's emotions and through manipulation. So I myself wonder where things go from here, because it can't be anywhere good, because it's firmly a thing of you're on side A or you're on side B. You're either down for the Falcons or you're down for the Patriots, and we will fight to the bitter end until our side wins. And it seems like a coalition between the establishment Republicans and Democrats, but out front. And that's the scary part. I'm not trying to hide it. It's out front. So I don't know. I'll leave that with you guys and see what you think about it.
Brave. Yeah, Brave. No, thank you for the call. I'm gonna put in a somewhat radical contradictory position, which is it's always been that way. Truth has always been secondary to swaying people's emotions. And what's happened in the past half decade or so is that the internet has sort of blown open this journalistic consensus that has pervaded institutions for decades, if not centuries. And we're seeing those sort of fault lines appear. We're seeing some cracks, and we're kind of realizing that's how this stuff actually works on a fundamental level. It's rhetoric. It's not logic. It's rhetoric that sways people in politics. In any event, we've got to close the show out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Thank you, engineer Andre. Thank you to producers Cam and Raheem. Thank you, Jamarl, my co-host. And thank you, for listening. Have a great day, folks. See you again tomorrow. Signing off, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you again tomorrow.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the books. It's a Monday. I want to thank all of you for joining us. We have some comments, so let's go to the chats. Let's see. Reeve Barker, please have Nico or somebody from the Convo Couch on. They're at least talking about the election fraud and not just blindly accepting the election results. Reeve, we have people here all the time talking about election fraud. The entire show was people talking about election fraud. Nico was on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Look, blindly accepting the election results or blindly calling for fraud are the same thing. You're blindly in both cases. This notion of election fraud that people are just pulling out of their ass is the new Russiagate stuff. I mean, it's fucking insane. Biden is controllable. Old gringo, Biden is controllable. The question is by who? I strongly suspect that Biden is controllable by the people who gave him that 1.x number of billions of dollars and all of those industries that are putting money in Biden's pocket. Biden, I agree with Caleb. This is the establishment strikes back. That's basically what this is. Look, my job isn't to tell you what you want to hear, Reeve. My job isn't to blow smoke in your ass and tell you, oh, it's fraud, it's this, it's that. Any more than it would be on one of those other stations to be screaming that the Russians toppled democracy or that the Iranians are doing this or that. My job is not to give you bullshit. My job is to tell you what I think is true. There's always some fucking around in regards to elections, whether that was in 2016, whether it was before that going back to Al Gore, whether it's the interstate cross-check, whether it's the voter ID laws. Dude, you can find all sorts of means of talking about the election being toppled. What Donald Trump is talking about, Donald Trump had said earlier, this election, unless I win it, it was cheated, which is just a ludicrous thing to say. A president with 200,000 deaths on his back. It's not shocking to me that the president loses. So yeah, it's not blindly accepting anything. You need evidence. Evidence matters. And, it's like, oh, there's a random story out on this kind of weird, but that's not enough. That's not enough. You had Tom Luongo, all of these people on screaming fraud, and they can't point to a goddamn thing. They want it to be fraud because they want Trump to win. And you have a lot of other political actors that was going to scream fraud regardless. Reality didn't matter. I'm making the point that unless you can find something with a little more bang for your buck, then at that point you're just hollering in the wind. Trump is going to get his lawsuits. Trump is going to get his recounts. I applaud him for doing it. Oftentimes candidates don't. By the same token, Trump is not going to accept the results regardless. And so the recounts are secondary. I mean, for fuck's sake, at one point he was saying stop the count, and at another point he was saying keep the count going. I mean, it's like he's a flagrant liar. Why would I believe anything that Trump says? But he will get his recount, which he should. He will get his lawsuits, which he should. Beyond that, I don't buy what he's saying. Whereas Biden has enough to win, but people's free inquiry, something like, what is it? Is Ben Lords? I don't know what that one says. Oh, Bedford's Law or whatever wouldn't be branded misinformation. It's not that I think Bedford's Law is misinformation. It's oftentimes people use that stuff in order to confuse or use that stuff to try to make a point. It's an election. You count the votes. You're going to get anomalies. I accept that there are going to be anomalies. If you're going to say that this election was fraudulent, then you need to show it. I have no issue with the inquiry. By the same token, you have a lot of political actors who are screaming that Donald Trump won or that there's fraud, and I don't see it. We got to prove that. Emblematic fate. Can you honestly blame Trump for delegitimizing the election when Hillary did it for the first when he lost? Right, and refusing to accept defeat and make up the Russiagate stuff. Look, I don't begrudge him for doing it. In fact, if I'm being bluntly honest, part of me is even glad he's doing it. If there is election fraud, the problem is a recount is not really going to find it. the recount is only counting what the machine tallied. If there is some kind of fraudulent software that is, let's say, screwing with the vote tally, then what that machine is probably going to print out is just the fraudulent vote tally, not the actual result. The recount is not necessarily a thing that will give Trump what he's looking for, even though I applaud him for doing the recount. I could be wrong, but I want him to do that. I wanted Jill Stein to do that. I wanted Hillary Clinton to do that. I want a transparent election. No more, no less. I don't have a dog in the hunt. The winner is the winner. If Donald Trump wins this race, then Donald Trump wins this race. There are benefits from my standpoint as a lefty with Donald Trump winning this race. So this is not, this kind of rah-rah motivated thinking. No. Yeah, let Trump get his lawsuits. Let him do all that stuff. But let's just be very clear. There's no situation in which Donald Trump would accept this election. And honestly, you could expose everything. And I have a hard time believing he'd accept the results. Is there mischief? Probably. Is that mischief enough to change the results? I have no idea. And so this is one of those things where I back any candidate as they go through their recounts and everything else. I want them to do those recounts. Do what you got to do. But I don't believe at the end of it that this is going to change the result of this race. I could be wrong, but we'll see. Wesley Walker Jr., the presidency was on Biden's bucket list. The president was on Biden's bucket list, and that's all. It was not to push policy, not to help Americans. Wesley, and that's the saddest part of this. If you're asked, look, part of the reason why I didn't want Biden to win this race was that it's a bucket list item for Biden. It wasn't, I'm getting this because I want to get all of these things accomplished. No, this is the establishment strikes back. The same reason that people put Trump in the office in the first place was basically what Biden was going to replenish. Yeah, this is not, people out there dancing in the streets, and I have no idea why. It's like, Biden is your president, but what did you get out of it? Nothing. You just got somebody who wasn't Trump. He may give you some good things. Don't misunderstand me. There's always a thing here or there. But at the end of the day, Biden was able to get in office offering nothing. And that's the saddest aspect of this race. Honestly, it just is. Also, look, the Democrats delegitimized Trump's race from jump. It's not shocking to me that Donald Trump not accept the election results and push hard. I wish Sanders wouldn't have accepted those results and pushed for recounts and everything else. He didn't. Trump is doing it. He's the avatar of that. Good for him. Good for him. And if there's some weird anomaly where Donald Trump is able to retain power, then he retains power. But I don't want it to be this nonsense where he has no evidence of this stuff and he's still pushing. And, it's like having zero evidence and you're still pushing for it and sending new electors and sending it to the House of Representatives. I just don't buy that all of these guys are going to set themselves on fire for Trump. Could be wrong. I just don't see it. I'm going to end it here. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all. I will see you guys a little bit later.